The fluorescent hospital lights burned my eyes as I heard my father's voice through the doctor's phone. She's faking it, just like her mother did. I just collapsed at work on Christmas Eve, 32 years old, working myself to exhaustion to fund my family's lifestyle. And instead of rushing to my bedside, my father dismissed me like a burden. My mother. She'd been dead for 17 years. Or so they told me. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Not with concern, not with love, but with a photo of $4 $600 restaurant bill from their Christmas dinner. The message read, "Don't forget to pay this." 74 missed calls followed over the next 2 days, not one asking if I was okay. Every voicemail the same desperate demand, "We need you, call back now." Then came a text from an unknown number that changed everything. "Don't trust your family. They lied about everything. Your mother didn't die, she disappeared, and you're next." In that sterile hospital room hooked to machines that beeped with every struggling heartbeat, I made a decision that would destroy my family's carefully constructed lies and expose secrets buried for nearly 2 decades. What I discovered wasn't just financial betrayal. It was something far darker. A conspiracy involving forged documents, stolen millions, and a truth about my mother's death that would bring my father to his knees. They treated me like an ATM. They underestimated me completely. That was their fatal mistake. This is the story of how I took back everything they stole and made sure they paid for every single lie. My name is Kelsey Morris. I'm 32 years old. And until 3 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I work as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Seattle, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties but leaves you eating takeout at your desk more nights than not. I've spent the last decade building a career maintaining an immaculate credit score and somehow becoming the person my entire family calls when they need money, which lately has been constantly. The office was nearly empty that Christmas Eve. Most of my colleagues had left by noon, rushing home to families and festive gatherings and all the warmth that comes with the holiday season. I stayed because I always stay. Because my father had called that morning asking if I could help out with some unexpected expenses, and helping out meant I needed to process a same-day wire transfer that required me to be physically present at my workstation. The amount was $12,000 this time. For what exactly I'd stopped asking years ago. I remember the exact moment it happened. I was standing at the printer watching expense reports scroll out in neat, orderly lines when the edges of my vision started to blur. The fluorescent lights above me seemed to pulse and brighten until they were almost blinding. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribcage and was slowly, methodically tightening them. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs wouldn't cooperate. The air felt thick, impossible to pull in. "Kelsey, you okay?" Marcus from accounting was suddenly beside me, his voice sounding distant and hollow, like he was speaking from the end of a very long tunnel. I opened my mouth to say I was fine because I always say I'm fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, my knees buckled. The floor rushed up to meet me, and I remember thinking absurdly that I should apologize for the disruption, for making a scene, for being a problem. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper as hands caught me, lowering me gently to the industrial carpet. "I'm so sorry. I just need a minute. I can finish the transfer. I'm sorry." Even as my body betrayed me, my first instinct was to apologize, to minimize, to make sure everyone knew I wasn't trying to cause trouble or inconvenience anyone. Looking back now, I can see how deeply that response was embedded in me, this reflexive need to make myself smaller, less burdensome, perpetually grateful for whatever scraps of consideration came my way. Marcus was calling 911. Someone else was loosening my collar. My phone, which had fallen from my pocket, buzzed incessantly against the floor. Text after text after text, the vibrations creating a constant rattling hum. I couldn't see the screen, but I knew who it was. My father probably asking if the transfer had gone through. Or my Aunt Caroline wanting to know if I'd had a chance to look at some paperwork she'd sent over. Or my sister Emma needing me to cover her car payment again. The paramedics arrived with efficient, practiced calm. They asked me questions I couldn't quite answer. When did this start was? I on any medications? Did I have a history of heart problems? Their hands were gentle as they checked my vitals and loaded me onto a stretcher, but I barely registered their touch. All I could focus on was my phone still buzzing, still demanding my attention, even as my body was shutting down. In the ambulance strapped to a gurney with an oxygen mask pressed to my face, I drifted in and out of consciousness. The siren wailed overhead. The paramedic beside me spoke into a radio-medical terminology I didn't understand flowing past me in a steady stream. And then I heard her say, "We're contacting family now. Does anyone have a number for her parents?" Through the haze of exhaustion and fear, I felt something like relief. My parents would come. They'd be worried. They'd meet me at the hospital and everything would be okay, because that's what families do, isn't it? They show up when it matters. The paramedic held her phone to her ear. I could hear it ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Then my father's voice, familiar and clipped, answered. "This is Michael Morris." "Mr. Morris, this is Seattle Fire Department paramedics. We're transporting your daughter Kelsey to Harborview Medical Center. She collapsed at work, and we're concerned about possible cardiac issues. We wanted to notify you." "She's faking it." My father's voice was flat, dismissive, utterly certain. "She does this for attention, just like her mother did." The words hit me harder than the collapse itself. Lying there struggling to breathe, hooked up to monitors that beeped with every labored heartbeat, I heard my own father tell medical professionals that I was pretending, that I was performing some kind of elaborate manipulation. But it was the second part of his statement that lodged itself in my chest like a shard of ice, just like her mother did. My mother had died when I was 15. A sudden heart condition, they'd told me. She was there one day and gone the next, leaving behind a grief-stricken family and 1,000 unanswered questions that I'd learned not to ask. In the 17 years since my family had spoken of her in hushed, careful tones, always emphasizing how fragile she'd been, how emotionally unstable, how difficult things had been before she passed. But no one had ever said she'd faked anything. No one had ever compared her to me in that tone of contempt and irritation. The paramedic's professional composure faltered for just a moment. "Sir, your daughter is genuinely in medical distress. We're taking her to the ER now. Do what you need to do." He'd already dismissed us both. "But don't expect me to drop everything for another one of her episodes." The line went dead. I closed my eyes against the tears that threatened to spill over. Even now, even in this moment of complete vulnerability, I wasn't worth his concern. I wasn't worth a 20-minute drive to the hospital. I wasn't worth anything except whatever financial utility I could provide. The ER was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Nurses moved around me with practiced efficiency, starting IVs and running tests and asking questions I could barely process. A young doctor with kind eyes examined me, his brow furrowed with concern that felt almost foreign, genuine worry from a complete stranger, while my own family couldn't be bothered to show up. "Your vitals are stabilizing," he said gently, "but I'm concerned about what caused this. Your cortisol levels are extremely elevated, your blood pressure is dangerously high, and based on your blood work, I'd say you've been running on empty for a very long time." He asked about stress, about sleep, about whether I felt safe at home. The questions felt invasive and somehow exactly right, like he could see through the careful facade I'd maintained for years. I didn't know how to answer him. How do you explain that you're drowning under the weight of other people's expectations, that you've spent your entire adult life being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who fixes everyone else's problems while your own pile up like unpaid bills? Hours passed. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Christmas Day now. My phone returned to me by a nurse sat silent on the bedside table. No calls, no messages asking if I was okay. Nothing. And then just after 1 in the morning, it finally buzzed. My heart leapt despite myself. Maybe they'd realized how serious this was. Maybe they were on their way. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. It was a photo message from my father. An invoice from Canlis, one of Seattle's most expensive restaurants. The total at the bottom read $4,682.47. Below it, a single line of text: "Don't forget to pay this." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. While I'd been fighting to breathe in an ambulance while doctors had been hooking me up to machines to make sure my heart wouldn't give out, my family had been celebrating Christmas at a restaurant that charged $75 for a steak, and they wanted me to pay for it. The morphine the nurse had given me for the chest pain was starting to take effect, pulling me down into a heavy, dreamless fog. But before I surrendered to it, one thought crystallized in my mind with absolute clarity. My father had said my mother faked things. That she'd done something that made him compare her to me with such contempt. My mother, who'd supposedly died of natural causes. My mother, who I barely remembered beyond scattered impressions of gentle hands and sad eyes. My mother about whom no one would ever tell me the complete truth. What did my mother do? I whispered into the empty room. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The morphine dragged me under. And somewhere in the chemical darkness, I made a decision I didn't even know I was making. I was going to find out. Whatever it took, whatever I had to face, I was going to learn the truth about the woman whose name had become a weapon in my father's hands. I was going to find out what really happened to Diane Morris. I woke to weak winter sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds and the steady beep of monitors that had become my unwelcome companions. My chest still ached with every breath, but it was a duller pain now, more exhaustion than crisis. A nurse I didn't recognize checked my IV and offered a practiced smile before disappearing back into the hallway's controlled chaos. Christmas morning. I should have been somewhere warm and filled with laughter. Instead, I was alone in a sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, trying not to think about the restaurant bill on my phone or the way my father's voice had sounded when he dismissed my collapse as performance art. Around mid-morning, a doctor I hadn't seen before entered my room. He was perhaps in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent decades absorbing other people's pain. His name tag read, Dr. Richard Parker, Internal Medicine. He carried a tablet and a worn leather notebook, and unlike the hurried residents who'd cycled through during the night, he actually pulled up a chair and sat down beside my bed. "Good morning, Kelsey. I'm Dr. Parker. I'll be overseeing your care today." His voice was measured, kind without being patronizing. "I've been reviewing your test results from last night, and I'd like to talk with you about what we found." I braced myself for bad news. Heart damage, liver problems, something that would require surgery or extensive treatment, something expensive that I'd have to figure out how to pay for while still covering everyone else's needs. But what he said was somehow worse, because it was so mundane, so preventable, so completely my own fault. "Your blood work shows markers that concern me quite a bit." He began, his eyes on the tablet, but his attention clearly focused on my reactions. "Your cortisol levels are extremely elevated, not just high for the moment of crisis, but chronically so. The patterns suggest your body has been in a sustained stress response for months, possibly years. You're also severely deficient in several key vitamins, particularly B12 and D, which combined with your other labs suggests you're not sleeping adequately, probably not eating regular meals, and your body has been running on adrenaline for far too long." He set the tablet down and looked at me directly. "These aren't the results I see from someone who simply works too hard. This is what I see in people who are living under extreme, unrelenting pressure. The kind of pressure that doesn't let up even when they're supposedly resting." I felt exposed, like he'd somehow pulled back a curtain I'd carefully kept closed for years. "I do work a lot," I said, defaulting to my usual deflection. "Investment analysis is demanding, long hours, high stakes. It's just the nature of the job. That's part of it, I'm sure. He agreed, but his tone suggested he wasn't buying the complete picture I was trying to paint. But Kelsey, your body is telling me a story that goes beyond work stress. These physiological markers, they indicate someone who doesn't feel safe to fully relax. Someone who's constantly vigilant, constantly managing something or someone. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle between us. Then he asked very gently, "Do you feel safe at home?" The question caught me off guard. Yes. I live alone. I have my own apartment. That's not quite what I asked. His expression remained neutral, professionally concerned. Do you feel safe in your family relationships? Has anyone in your immediate family struggled with similar health issues? Unexplained illnesses, chronic exhaustion, conditions that doctors couldn't quite pin down. My mother's face flashed through my memory. Tired eyes, a smile that never quite reached them the way she'd seemed to fade even before she disappeared from my life entirely. My mother died when I was 15, I heard myself say. They said it was her heart. She'd been sick for a while before that, I think. Tired a lot. But I was young, I don't remember all the details. The moment I said her name, something shifted in Dr. Parker's demeanor. He went very still, his eyes sharpening with recognition that made my pulse quicken. Your mother's name was Diane Morris. Yes. My throat felt tight. Diane Catherine Morris. Why did you know her? Dr. Parker set his tablet aside completely and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, choosing his words with visible care. I treated a woman by that name approximately 17 years ago. She came into this emergency room 3 separate times over a period of about 4 months. Each time she presented with symptoms very similar to what you experienced last night: exhaustion, chest tightness, difficulty breathing. But she also had confusion, memory gaps, periods where she couldn't account for hours of time. My heart was pounding now, the monitors beside me registering my rising anxiety. We ran every cardiac test available. He continued, his voice low and precise. Her heart was fine, structurally perfect, but she was clearly terrified of something or someone. I remember her because she refused to let us contact her family. She paid in cash, and when I pressed her about what was happening in her life, she looked at me with these haunted eyes and said, "If I tell you, he'll know I told. And then it'll be worse." The room felt too small, suddenly the air too thin. She was afraid, I whispered. Of who? She wouldn't say. I tried to connect her with social services, with domestic violence resources, but she refused everything, said it would only make things more dangerous. Dr. Parker's expression was heavy with old regret. The last time I saw her, she seemed almost resigned, like she'd accepted something terrible. 2 months later, I saw her obituary in the paper. Sudden cardiac event, it said. The words hung between us like an accusation. Your mother didn't die of natural causes, did she? He asked quietly. Not really. Not the way they told you. I couldn't breathe. The monitors were beeping faster now, registering my distress. They said everyone said it was her heart, that she'd had an undiagnosed condition, that it was sudden but not suspicious. There was a funeral. I was there. I saw... You saw a closed casket, he guessed. I nodded mute with dawning horror. Dr. Parker was about to say something else when we both heard footsteps in the hallway slowing as they approached my room. The door was open about 6 inches, enough for someone to hear our conversation if they'd been standing just outside. Both of us froze, our eyes locked in shared understanding that we were discussing something dangerous. A shadow passed across the gap in the doorway, not walking past, but lingering, listening. Dr. Parker's jaw tightened. We sat in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, the shadow moved away, footsteps receding down the corridor. When Dr. Parker spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Not here. Not now. But Kelsey, there are things about your mother's death that don't add up. Things your family never wanted investigated. Things that were quietly closed and filed away because certain people made sure they stayed that way. "What things?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "What are you saying happened to my mother?" But before he could answer, his pager went off with an urgent series of beeps. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. "Trauma in the ER. I have to go." He stood quickly but paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. The way he looked back at me was weighted with meaning, with warnings he couldn't quite articulate in the moment. "If you want the truth, start by questioning everything they told you," he said. Then he was gone, his footsteps hurrying toward whatever emergency demanded his immediate attention, leaving me alone with questions that felt like they might split me open if I couldn't find answers soon. I stared at the empty doorway for a long time, my mind racing. Someone had been listening to our conversation. Someone knew I was starting to ask questions about my mother. And somewhere in the 17 years since her death, the truth had been buried so deep that even thinking about excavating it felt dangerous. After Dr. Parker left, I sat alone with his words echoing in my head like a warning bell I couldn't silence. "Question everything they told you." The phrase felt both liberating and terrifying, like he'd handed me permission to doubt the entire foundation of my understanding about my mother, my family, my entire life up until this moment. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, intending to search for information about my mother's death, to see if there were newspaper articles or public records I'd never thought to look for before. But the moment the screen lit up, I froze. 74 missed calls. I stared at the number, certain I was misreading it. But no there. They were a relentless cascade of incoming calls that had accumulated over the past 3 hours while I'd been sleeping off the morphine and talking to Dr. Parker. My father's name appeared most frequently, but my Aunt Caroline had called at least 20 times, and even my sister Emma had tried to reach me a dozen times. My first instinct, deeply ingrained from years of conditioning, was guilt. They must be worried sick. They must have heard what happened and now they're frantic to make sure I'm okay. I should call them back immediately and reassure them. But then I opened the voicemail messages. My father's first message left at 7:30 this morning. "Kelsey, we need you to call back immediately. This is urgent. We have a situation that requires your attention." Not "Are you okay?" Not "We heard you're in the hospital." Just "We need you." I scrolled to the next message. My Aunt Caroline, her voice tight with barely contained irritation. "Kelsey, this is ridiculous. You can't just ignore us when we need to discuss important family matters. Call me back as soon as you get this." Another from my father, time-stamped an hour later. "Don't ignore us, Kelsey. This is serious. We wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important." I went through message after message, a mounting sense of unreality washing over me. Not a single one asked about my health. Not one person said, "I hope you're feeling better," or "We were so scared when we heard you collapsed." Every single message was a variation on the same theme: "Call us back. This is urgent. We need you, don't ignore us." My sister Emma's messages were slightly different in tone, more pleading than demanding, but the content was essentially identical. "Kelsey, please call. Dad's really upset. We need to talk to you about something important. Please don't shut us out." The final message from my father had come in just 20 minutes ago. His voice had an edge to it that I recognized from childhood, that particular quality that meant he was done being patient and expected immediate compliance. "We need you. If you care about this family at all, you'll call back. We've given you time to rest. Now it's time to handle your responsibilities." I set the phone down on the blanket, my hands shaking. 74 calls. Not one asking if I was alive. Not one expressing concern about the fact that I'd collapsed at work and spent the night in the emergency room hooked up to machines monitoring my heart. The realization settled over me like ice water. I was not a daughter to them. I was a resource, a problem solver. An ATM with feelings they had to occasionally manage in order to maintain access. I picked up the phone again, this time looking more carefully at the call log rather than just the voicemail count. That's when I noticed it. 3 calls from an unknown number logged at precisely 8:43, 10:43, and 12:43. exactly 2 hours apart. The precision was striking, almost eerie in its regularity, especially contrasted against the chaotic barrage of family calls. The unknown number had left no voicemails, just 3 calls evenly spaced, like someone was checking if I was conscious, yet if I was ready to receive information. Dr. Parker returned to my room about 20 minutes later, moving more slowly now that the trauma emergency had been handled. He looked tired, but determined. I showed him the call log pointing to the unknown number. "Does this number mean anything to you?" I asked. He pulled out his reading glasses and leaned in to look at the screen. The moment he saw it, his entire body went rigid. His face, already pale from exhaustion, went a shade lighter. "Where did you get this number?" "I didn't. They called me. 3 times. "Who is it?" Dr. Parker sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed, suddenly looking every one of his 60-some years. "I've seen this number before, though it's been years. It belonged to someone who ran a crisis center for women leaving dangerous situations, domestic violence, financial abuse, that kind of thing. She helped your mother, or tried to. Your mother had contacted her in those weeks before she died." My throat felt tight. Who ran the center? Her name was Margaret Chen. She's retired now. But if this is still her number, and if she's calling you... He trailed off, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "It means she knows something. Something she thinks you need to hear." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text message from the unknown number. My fingers felt numb as I opened it. The message was brief, but every word hit like a physical blow. "Don't trust your family. They lied about everything. If you want to know what really happened to your mother, you need to see the documents they've been hiding. Check the company registered under your middle name." My middle name is Diane, my mother's first name. I looked up at Dr. Parker, who was reading the message over my shoulder. "Do you know anything about a company with my mother's name?" He shook his head slowly. "But if there is one, and if it's been hidden from you, that could explain a lot. Financial control forged documents, it's a common pattern in these cases." I tried to text back, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype the message twice. "Who are you? How did you know my mother?" The message showed as delivered, but no response came. Just silence, heavy and expectant, as if the person on the other end was waiting to see what I'd do with the information they'd given me. I pulled up a browser on my phone and searched for business registrations in Washington state, trying various combinations of my full name, my middle name, my mother's name. Nothing appeared in the public databases, but that didn't necessarily mean nothing existed. Private trusts, shell companies, business entities with restricted information. There were dozens of ways to hide financial structures if you knew what you were doing. And my father, I realized with a creeping certainty, definitely knew what he was doing. Dr. Parker was about to say something when both of our phones buzzed simultaneously. Mine with a text message. His with what looked like a hospital system alert. My message was from my father. Simple, direct, and somehow more threatening than any of the previous 74 calls. "We know you're awake. We're coming to the hospital." I looked up at Dr. Parker, my heart hammering against my ribs. "They're coming here. Right now." His expression hardened with something that looked like protective instinct. "You don't have to see them. I can have security restrict visitors to your room. As your attending physician, I have that authority if I believe visitors would be detrimental to your recovery." But even as he said it, I knew that would only delay the inevitable. My family wasn't going away. Whatever they needed from me, whatever urgent matter had prompted 74 phone calls, they weren't going to accept being shut out. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a new thought was forming. Maybe it was time to stop running from confrontation. Maybe it was time to start asking the questions I'd been trained never to ask. They arrived 30 minutes later, and I heard them before I saw them. My father's voice carried down the hallway, warm and concerned, as he spoke to a nurse asking about his daughter's condition, with exactly the right notes of paternal worry. My Aunt Caroline's lighter voice joined his, both of them performing concern so perfectly that anyone listening would think they were devoted family members rushing to a loved one's bedside. The performance continued as they entered my room. My father came to my bedside immediately, his hand covering mine with practiced gentleness, his face arranged in an expression of relief and care that would have been convincing if I hadn't just listened to 74 voicemails that never once asked if I was okay. "Kelsey, sweetheart, we've been so worried," he said, his voice thick with emotion that didn't quite reach his eyes. "When we heard you collapsed, we were beside ourselves. We wanted to come immediately, but the hospital said you needed rest, and we didn't want to disturb your recovery." Caroline positioned herself on my other side, smoothing my blanket with maternal concern. "You gave us such a fright, dear. You really need to take better care of yourself. All this stress you're under, working such terrible hours." I watched them both, feeling like I was seeing actors perform a play I'd somehow been cast in without learning my lines. The warmth lasted perhaps 90 seconds before the veneer started to crack. My father glanced at his watch, then at Caroline, some silent communication passing between them that I'd learned to recognize over the years as the signal that the real conversation was about to begin. "Now, we hate to bring this up when you're not feeling well." My father started, his tone shifting from concerned to businesslike. "But we have a bit of a situation at home that we need to discuss with you." There it was. The pivot. The real reason for the visit. Caroline picked up the thread seamlessly. "It's terribly stressful, and we wouldn't burden you with it if we had any other choice, but you're the only one in a position to help." My father pulled up a chair, settling in as if preparing to deliver a presentation. "The house is in some financial difficulty. There were some unexpected expenses, some investments that didn't perform as we'd hoped, and now we're facing foreclosure if we don't come up with $80,000 within the next 30 days. I must have made some sound because he held up a hand as if to forestall objections. "I know it's a lot, but Kelsey, you're the only one with good credit, the only one the banks will work with. We need you to co-sign a loan, or if you're in a position to help more directly, we could avoid the interest charges altogether." The audacity of it took my breath away more effectively than the collapse had. I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, recovering from what doctors suspected was a stress-induced medical crisis, and they were asking me to take on more debt for them. "You're the only one who can save the family home," Caroline added, her hand tightening on mine in what was probably meant to be comforting, but felt more like restraint. "After everything we've done for you, everything we've sacrificed to raise you, surely you can help us in our time of need." When I hesitated, not even refusing, but simply not immediately agreeing, Caroline's warmth evaporated like morning frost. Her voice turned sharp, brittle with barely contained anger. "After everything we've done for you, after taking you in when your mother was too unstable to care for you properly, this is how you repay that loyalty." My father's expression didn't change, but his grip on my hand tightened just enough to border on painful. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Kelsey. Family is everything. Without family, you have nothing." They stayed another 15 minutes, alternating between veiled threats and emotional manipulation, before finally leaving with a promise to let me rest and discuss this again soon. The moment they were gone, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time since they'd arrived. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. $80,000. It was an enormous sum, but not impossible given my savings and income. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to fix things and make everyone else's problems disappear, was already calculating whether I could access that much liquidity quickly enough. But Dr. Parker's words kept echoing in my mind. "Question everything they told you." I opened the financial monitoring app I'd set up years ago after a coworker had been a victim of identity theft. I'd been diligent about checking it monthly, watching for any unusual activity or accounts opened in my name without my knowledge. But now I wondered what I might have missed, what I'd been trained not to see. The initial dashboard looked normal. My credit cards, my investment accounts, my mortgage on the small condo I owned. But there was a tab I rarely checked, one that showed any accounts where I was listed as an authorized user or co-signer. I clicked on it and my blood ran cold. The debt wasn't $80,000. It was $297,412.16. I scrolled through the list, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. Credit cards I'd never opened, lines of credit I'd never authorized, personal loans with my signature that I knew I'd never signed. And the dates, some of these accounts went back years. One credit card showed my supposed signature from when I was 16 years old. Embedded in the middle of the list was something that made my vision blur: Diane K. Morris Trust, listed as a business entity with multiple associated accounts. I was supposedly a beneficiary, but the balance showed negative $215,000. A trust that was supposed to benefit me was instead drowning in debt I'd never been told existed. My middle name. My mother's first name. A trust I'd never heard of until a stranger texted me about it less than an hour ago. I clicked on the trust name trying to access more details, but it required a separate login. I tried my usual credentials. Access denied. I tried variations. All denied. Finally, I found a link to request access as a listed beneficiary and clicked Submit. The page refreshed. Instead of a confirmation, a stark message appeared in red text. Account access restricted by primary trustee. Contact trust administrator for authorization. My heart was pounding so hard the monitors beside me started beeping more urgently. I ignored them, clicking back to the main financial portal, trying to access the public business registry to search for more information about the trust. The moment I entered the search terms, Diane Morris Trust Washington State Business Entity, my entire screen went blank. Then an error message. Your access credentials have been reset for security purposes. Please contact customer service. I tried to log back in. My password didn't work. I tried password recovery. Unable to verify identity. Account temporarily locked. Someone was watching. Someone knew the exact moment I'd started searching and had moved to block me immediately. The timing was too precise, too immediate to be anything but active monitoring. I sat there staring at my locked phone screen, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd just discovered. My family hadn't just asked me for money. They'd been stealing from me for years, using my identity, forging my signature building debt in my name since I was a child. And somewhere in all of this was a trust bearing my mother's name that I'd never been told existed. My email notification pinged. I opened it with numb fingers. The sender was my father's email address. The subject line was blank. The message contained only one sentence. Stop looking. You don't know who you're dealing with. I stared at those words, and for the first time since childhood, instead of feeling afraid, I felt something else entirely. Rage. Cold, clarifying rage that burned away years of conditioning and fear and guilt. They had stolen my identity. They had forged my signature. They had built a mountain of debt in my name while I worked myself into the ground to fund their lifestyle. And they thought a simple threat would make me stop asking questions. They had severely underestimated who they were dealing with. I spent the next hour trying every possible avenue to access information about the trust, calling customer service lines and being transferred between departments, only to be told repeatedly that I needed authorization from the primary trustee to view any documentation. The circular logic was maddening. I was supposedly a beneficiary, but I couldn't access information about my own trust without permission from whoever controlled it. Every door I tried to open was already locked from the inside. I was still on hold with yet another unhelpful bureaucrat when Caroline returned, this time alone. She knocked softly on the doorframe before entering, carrying an elaborate bouquet of white lilies that immediately made the small hospital room smell like a funeral home. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, dear," she said, her voice pitched at that perfect frequency of concern that somehow managed to sound both caring and condescending. "I wanted to check on you without your father hovering. You know how he can be all business even at times like this." She set the flowers on the windowsill with practiced care, arranging them just so, taking her time to find the perfect position. When she finally turned back to me, I saw what I'd been too overwhelmed to notice during their earlier visit. Her eyes were cold, calculating, constantly scanning my face for reactions she could catalog and use. The smile never quite reached those eyes. I wanted to apologize if we seemed insensitive earlier. She continued, settling into the chair beside my bed with the ease of someone who knew exactly how long she planned to stay. Your father and I were just so worried about everything falling apart. When you're under that kind of pressure, you don't always express yourself as gently as you should. Family has to stick together during difficult times, you understand. That's what family means, standing together when things get hard, supporting each other through challenges. She reached out and patted my hand, the gesture mechanical, perfunctory. Though I have to say, Kelsey, you've always had a tendency to make things more complicated than they need to be. Even as a little girl, you were always questioning things, pushing back against perfectly reasonable requests. Creating drama where there didn't need to be any. I felt the words trying to reshape reality, trying to make me doubt my own perception of events. It was subtle, insidious, the way she was reframing my entire childhood as a series of unreasonable rebellions, rather than what it had actually been, a young girl trying to understand why she always felt like she was failing some impossible standard. I don't remember it that way, I said quietly. Caroline's smile didn't waver, but something hardened in her expression. Well, memory is a funny thing, isn't it? We all remember events differently. The important thing is moving forward as a family united, not dwelling on the past or dredging up old grievances that serve no purpose. The mention of the past gave me an opening I couldn't resist. Caroline, can I ask you something about my mother? The change in her was immediate and striking. Her spine straightened. Her fingers, which had been loosely clasped in her lap, tightened until the knuckles went white. For just a fraction of a second, her carefully maintained expression cracked, and I saw something raw underneath something that looked like guilt and anger twisted together. Your mother, she said, and her voice had gone brittle, sharp-edged. You're so much like her, you know, always asking questions, always making things complicated. Diane couldn't just accept her role either. She couldn't just be grateful for what she had and do what was expected of her. The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable, almost visceral. She caught herself, seemed to realize she'd revealed too much, and the smile snapped back into place like a mask being repositioned. What do you mean, accept her role? I pressed, my heart hammering. What role was she supposed to accept? Caroline stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with sharp, agitated movements. Your mother had responsibilities. To the family, to the business, to the people who depended on her. She tried to run from them, tried to pretend she could just walk away from her obligations. Her voice dropped, became almost contemplative. Look where that got her. The implication hung in the air between us, heavy and threatening. My mother hadn't just died. She'd been punished. That's what Caroline was suggesting, whether she realized it or not. What happened to my mother, Caroline? I asked directly, abandoning any pretense of casual curiosity. What really happened? She moved toward the door, but before leaving she leaned close, her perfume cloying and overwhelming. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, intimate and menacing. Some things are better left buried, sweetheart. Your mother learned that the hard way. She thought she could dig into things that weren't her concern, thought she could challenge the way things worked. I'd hate to see you make the same mistakes she did. It wasn't advice. It was a warning, a threat wrapped in familial concern. I decided to push one more time to see how she'd react. What can you tell me about the Diane K. Morris Trust? Caroline's entire body went rigid. The pleasant mask shattered completely, replaced by something cold and frightening. Don't go digging into things you don't understand, Kelsey. Not everything is yours to know. Some doors are locked for good reasons. It's a trust with my mother's name. I'm listed as a beneficiary. I have every right to. You have the rights we decide you have. Caroline interrupted, her voice like ice. You need to be very careful about what questions you ask and who you ask them to, for your own good. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the frame, not looking back. Think very carefully about whether you really want to know the truth, Kelsey, because once you know it, you can't unknow it. And the truth isn't always what sets you free. Sometimes it's what destroys everything you thought you understood about your life. Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the hallway with purposeful precision, leaving behind the sickly sweet smell of lilies and the lingering weight of her threats. I sat there, my mind reeling, trying to process everything she'd said and, more importantly, everything she'd carefully avoided saying. My mother had tried to run from something. She'd challenged something or someone, and she'd paid for it with her life. Doctor Parker appeared in the doorway so suddenly I jumped. He'd clearly been waiting nearby, maybe listening, maybe watching for Caroline to leave. His expression was grave, worried in a way that went beyond professional concern for a patient. "Caroline isn't the one you need to worry about most," he said quietly, glancing down the hallway to make sure she was truly gone. I looked at him, my throat tight with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. "Then who is—" Dr. Parker stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him, something he hadn't done during any of our previous conversations. The gesture felt significant, protective, as if he was creating a barrier between me and whatever threats lurked in the hospital corridors. "Your father," he said, settling into the chair Caroline had just vacated. "In my 30 years of emergency medicine, I've treated countless victims of domestic abuse and family violence. I've learned to recognize patterns. The most dangerous perpetrators aren't always the ones who appear threatening on the surface. Caroline is openly hostile, manipulative in ways that are relatively easy to identify once you know what to look for. But your father is different. He's what we call a covert controller." I watched him choose his words carefully, his medical precision applied to a diagnosis that had nothing to do with blood work or vital signs. Financial manipulation is his primary tool. He's made you financially responsible for the entire family, created a system where your worth is measured entirely by your utility to him. Emotional invalidation, dismissing your feelings, your health concerns, your boundaries, keeps you uncertain of your own perceptions, and strategic isolation, making you believe that family loyalty requires complete submission to his needs, while he offers nothing in return. Dr. Parker leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. 17 years ago, a woman came to this emergency room 3 separate times over 4 months. Each visit she presented with symptoms of extreme stress, chest pain, difficulty breathing, disorientation. But she also had memory gaps. She couldn't explain periods of confusion that didn't match any neurological condition we could identify. We suspected she might be ingesting something or being drugged, but she refused every attempt we made to help her report it. My mouth had gone dry. My mother. "She wouldn't tell me who she was afraid of," he continued. "But I noticed something. Every time I mentioned contacting her husband, her entire body would tense. She'd flinch, actually physically recoil. When I asked her directly if her husband was the source of her fear, she went completely silent, wouldn't confirm or deny, just stared at me with these devastated eyes and said, 'If I tell you, it'll get worse.' The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. I couldn't get enough air. I tried to connect her with social services, with domestic violence resources. She refused everything, said that calling attention to the situation would only make him angrier, would only prove she was being disloyal. The last time I saw her, she seemed almost resigned, like she'd accepted that there was no way out." He paused, pain evident in his expression. 2 months later, I read her obituary. Sudden cardiac event. I wanted to report my suspicions, but I had no proof, and families like yours know how to make questions go away. After he left to complete his rounds, I lay in that hospital bed as memories I'd carefully locked away for years began flooding back with terrible clarity. I remembered my father's impossible standards, how nothing I did was ever quite good enough. A 98 on a test was met with questions about the missing 2 points. An award at school was acknowledged with a reminder that my sister had won something similar at a younger age. Every achievement was diminished, every failure magnified, until I learned to measure my worth entirely by his approval. And my sister Emma, she'd been allowed to drift through life without consequences, dropping out of college, switching jobs every few months, racking up debt that I was somehow expected to cover. At the time, I'd thought it was just personality differences, birth order dynamics. Now I wondered if it was something more calculated. If he'd deliberately created one child who could never meet his standards, and another who would never have to try keeping us divided, preventing us from ever comparing notes about how we were both being used. I remembered my mother during those last years before she died. Her increasing forgetfulness, the way she'd start sentences and then lose track of what she was saying, the emotional outbursts my father would describe as evidence of her instability. I'd been 14, 15 years old, and I'd believed his calm, rational explanations. He'd say things like, "Your mother isn't herself lately. We need to be patient with her. She's going through something." He made it sound like compassion when it was actually accusation. There was one memory that surfaced with particular vividness. I'd come home from school early, let myself in through the back door, and heard crying coming from my parents' bedroom. I'd found my mother sitting in the closet surrounded by papers, tears streaming down her face. When she saw me, she'd tried to hide what she was holding, shoving documents into a box in the back corner. "Kelsey, baby, you're home early," she'd said, her voice thick with tears and something that looked like fear. "Mom, what's wrong? What are those papers?" Before she could answer, my father had appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come home. The look on his face was something I'd tried to forget, cold fury masked by forced patience. "Diane, what are you doing? Kelsey, go to your room." "But Mom's crying." "Your mother is having one of her episodes. She gets confused, paranoid. You know how she is." He'd said it so reasonably, so calmly, as if he was the rational one dealing with an irrational situation. "Go to your room. Now." I'd obeyed, because that's what I did. I'd heard raised voices through the wall, my father's controlled anger, and my mother's desperate attempts to explain something. Later, when I'd tried to check on her, she'd been in bed groggy and disoriented, not quite herself. My father had explained she'd taken medication for her nerves and just needed rest. Now, lying in this hospital bed, I understood what I'd witnessed. Those papers had been evidence. Evidence she was trying to hide, trying to protect. And my father had discovered her attempting to show them to me to bring me into her confidence. Whatever medication he'd given her that evening, it wasn't for her nerves. It was to silence her, to make her compliant, to ensure she couldn't tell anyone what she knew. I saw the pattern now stretching from my mother's life directly into my own. The way he'd made me financially responsible for everyone, creating a web of obligation I couldn't escape without feeling like I was abandoning the people who needed me. The way he dismissed my health concerns, my boundaries, my attempts to create any distance. The guilt he manufactured every time I tried to prioritize my own well-being. He'd done this to my mother. Worn her down, isolated her, made her question her own sanity. And when she'd tried to escape, when she'd tried to expose him, he'd made sure she couldn't. And now he was doing the same thing to me. The realization was devastating, but also clarifying. I wasn't weak. I wasn't naturally submissive or obligation-driven. I'd been systematically trained, conditioned from childhood, to believe that my only value lay in serving his needs. Every guilt trip, every dismissal, every impossible standard, they were all tools in a pattern of control that had been refined over decades. My phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The message was brief and terrifying in its simplicity. "Your father made your mother disappear. I can prove it." I stared at that text message for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Every instinct told me to respond immediately, to demand proof, to arrange a meeting as soon as possible. But I forced myself to slow down, to think strategically. If my father had been monitoring my digital activity closely enough to lock my financial accounts the moment I started searching, he might also have access to my phone somehow. I needed to be smarter than I'd been before. Doctor Parker had cleared me for discharge that afternoon, though he'd strongly recommended a few more days of rest before returning to work. I'd signed the papers, gathered my belongings, and left the hospital without telling anyone where I was going. Instead of going home to my apartment, I took a rideshare to a hotel downtown, paying cash, and checking in under a name that wasn't mine, a trick I'd learned from a compliance training about fraud prevention. If my family was watching, they'd expect me to follow predictable patterns. I needed to become unpredictable. From the hotel room, using the guest Wi-Fi instead of my own data, I texted the unknown number back with a simple question: where and when? The response came within seconds, as if Margaret Chen had been waiting with her phone in her hand. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Cafe on Eastlake. Come alone. The name of the cafe triggered something in my memory, a fragment of childhood so distant, I'd almost forgotten it existed. My mother had taken me there a few times when I was very young, maybe 7 or 8 years old. I remembered blue vinyl booths and the smell of coffee, my mother letting me order hot chocolate with whipped cream, piled so high it threatened to spill over the cup's rim. I remembered feeling safe there, happy, like it was a place that existed outside the tension that usually filled our house. I arrived 15 minutes early the next morning, watching through the window from across the street to make sure no one from my family had somehow anticipated the meeting. The cafe looked exactly as I remembered it, frozen in time, the same blue booths visible through the front windows. When I was certain I hadn't been followed, I crossed the street and pushed through the door. An older woman sat in the corner booth, positioned so she could see both the entrance and the emergency exit at the back. She was perhaps in her mid-60s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that tracked my approach with the kind of cautious assessment that spoke of decades spent helping people in dangerous situations. "Kelsey," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. It wasn't a question. "Margaret Chen." She nodded once, then gestured to the server who'd been hovering nearby. "2 coffees, please, and we'd like privacy." The server, who seemed to know her, simply nodded and retreated. "Your mother used to bring you here," Margaret said, her voice low and careful. "She said it was the only place your father never thought to look for her because it wasn't expensive or impressive enough for his tastes. She could breathe here." The confirmation that my fragmented memories were real made my chest tight. "You said you could prove my father made her disappear. I need to know what that means. I need to know what happened to my mother." Margaret wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, choosing her words with visible care. "Your mother didn't die in 2008, Kelsey. She was placed in federal witness protection after agreeing to testify against your father and several of his business associates." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What?" Diane was a brilliant businesswoman. In the late 90s, she started a tech consulting firm that specialized in helping small companies optimize their operations. It was successful, genuinely successful, through her own skill and hard work, but your father saw it as an asset he could control and exploit. Margaret pulled out a tablet and opened a file showing me business documents I'd never seen. Registration papers for a company called Dia Moore Consulting, with my mother listed as founder and CEO. "He established the Diane K. Morris Trust when you were 5 years old," Margaret continued. "He told your mother it was for your college fund, a way to shelter assets for your future, but the legal structure actually gave him control over the trust's management while keeping the assets technically in your and your mother's names. It was a shell game beautifully constructed. He gradually moved your mother's business assets into the trust, then began using the company to provide services to clients who were actually fronts for organized crime." I felt sick. Money laundering. "Among other things, your mother didn't realize it at first. She thought her company was simply growing, taking on larger clients. But around 2007, she started noticing irregularities. Services billed that were never performed. Consulting fees that bore no relationship to actual work. She began documenting everything, keeping careful records. The papers in the closet. My mother crying, trying to hide evidence before my father found her. When she had enough proof, she contacted the FBI. They were very interested, your father's activities connected to a much larger investigation they'd been conducting. The plan was for Diane to continue gathering evidence while wearing a wire to help them build an airtight case. But someone leaked information about her cooperation. Suddenly there were threats. Not against your mother, but against you. Margaret's eyes held mine, making sure I understood the weight of what she was saying. Your father told Diane that if she testified, if she exposed what he'd done, you would have an accident. He described it in detail, made it clear he had the resources and connections to make it happen. He gave her a choice: testify and watch her daughter die or disappear and let you live. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't stop them. She chose me. She chose you, Margaret confirmed softly. The FBI agreed to place her in witness protection on the condition that the case against your father be suspended indefinitely. They faked her death, held a funeral with a closed casket, gave her a new identity in a new city. She's been alive this entire time, Kelsey, living under another name in another state, forbidden from contacting you because any connection might endanger both of you. My mother was alive. The grief I'd carried for 17 years, the hole her death had left in my life, all of it based on an elaborate lie constructed to save my life at the cost of hers. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope yellowed with age, my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized from old birthday cards I'd kept hidden in a box in my closet. She wrote this the night before she entered protection. Made me promise to give it to you when you were old enough to understand, and when it was safe enough for you to know. With your father's activities coming to light now, with you already asking questions, the FBI has agreed that keeping you in the dark might actually be more dangerous than telling you the truth. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small photograph. The photo showed the silver picture frame that sat on my nightstand, the one containing a family photo from when I was about 10 years old. But this copy of the photo had a detail circled in red ink at the bottom right corner of the frame, a tiny marking I'd never noticed before. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Your mother was brilliant. She knew she might not be able to take physical evidence with her, knew your father would search for and destroy anything obvious. So she hid it in the one place he'd never think to look, in your childhood memories. In objects you'd keep close without knowing why they mattered. I looked closer at the circled detail. It was minuscule, easy to miss unless you were looking for it, a tiny QR code etched into the metal backing of the frame. That code unlocks everything your mother tried to protect you with, Margaret said. Financial records, video recordings, documentation of every crime she witnessed, everything you need to finish what she started. But Kelsey, you need to understand, once you scan that code, once you access that information, there's no going back. Your father will know, and he'll do whatever it takes to protect himself. I looked at the envelope, at the QR code, at Margaret's concerned face, and I thought about my mother making the impossible choice to disappear so I could live. I thought about 17 years of grief that had been unnecessary. 17 years she'd spent alive but unreachable, watching from a distance as I walked into the same trap she'd barely escaped. I'm ready, I said. Show me everything. Margaret watched me with patient understanding as I carefully opened the envelope, my hands shaking so badly I nearly tore the paper. Inside were 3 sheets covered in my mother's distinctive handwriting, the loops and curves achingly familiar from old birthday cards and grocery lists I'd found tucked into books years after she died. Except she hadn't died. She'd been alive this entire time, living under another name, forbidden from reaching out to the daughter she'd sacrificed everything to protect. I started reading, and the tears came immediately, blurring the words until I had to blink them away to continue. My dearest Kelsey, if you're reading this, I've either been gone too long, or I'm never coming back. I'm so sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. I'm sorry for every birthday I'll miss, every milestone I won't witness, every moment of your life that will unfold without me there to see it. Please know that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever done, and I do it only because staying would mean watching you become his next victim. I had to stop pressing my hand to my mouth to hold back a sob. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my other hand's silent support, while I gathered myself enough to continue. Everything I did was to keep you safe from a man I once loved but came to fear. Your father isn't the person he pretends to be. The charming, successful businessman that everyone sees is a carefully constructed facade hiding someone cruel and calculating. He systematically destroyed my business, taking what I built with my own hands and twisting it into something criminal. He destroyed my confidence, making me doubt my own perceptions until I couldn't trust my own mind. And he nearly destroyed my sanity. The next paragraph made my stomach turn. He used prescription medications to make me appear unstable, anti-anxiety pills that made me foggy and forgetful, sleeping medication that left me disoriented. He had a doctor he paid off who would write prescriptions for anything he wanted, no questions asked. Your father would crush the pills into my coffee, my food, anywhere I wouldn't notice. When I'd forget conversations or lose track of time, he'd use it as proof that I was mentally ill, that I couldn't be trusted. He isolated me from friends, from anyone who might have noticed what was happening, and he threatened to take you away from me if I ever fought back, said he'd have me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. By the time I found the courage to resist, I'd been so worn down that I almost believed his version of reality. I thought about those final years before she disappeared, the way she'd seemed increasingly confused and exhausted. I'd believed my father's explanations that she was struggling with depression or early-onset dementia. The truth was so much worse. He'd been systematically poisoning her, gaslighting her, destroying her from the inside out while maintaining his perfect public image. The letter continued with specific instructions, her tone shifting from emotional confession to practical guidance, as if she'd forced herself to be strategic, even through her pain. I've hidden evidence in places he'll never think to look, in your childhood memories and objects you've had all along. The picture frame I gave you for your 10th birthday, the silver one with the ornate corners that you always loved, contains a QR code etched into the metal backing. I had it done by a jeweler who owed me a favor, told him it was a romantic gesture for my husband. The code leads to encrypted files stored on secure servers, financial records documenting every illegal transaction, video recordings I made secretly over months, audio files of him discussing his criminal activities with his associates, and documentation of everything he did to me and to our family. My 10th birthday. I still had that frame. It sat on my nightstand in my apartment, holding a photo of my mother and me at the beach, one of the last happy memories I had of us together. I'd kept it close all these years without knowing it contained the key to everything. But Kelsey, please be careful. Your father is dangerous when cornered, and he has powerful friends in places that matter. If you choose to pursue this, you cannot do it alone. Find Margaret Chen at the Riverside Women's Center on Aurora Avenue. She knows everything. She has copies of documents I gave her for safekeeping. She's been watching over you all these years, waiting for the right moment to approach you, waiting until you were old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. I looked up at Margaret, who nodded once in confirmation. She'd been there in the background of my life for 17 years. Watching, waiting, protecting me from a distance. The final paragraph destroyed me completely. I know you'll wonder why I left. You'll feel abandoned, betrayed, maybe even angry at me for disappearing without explanation. Please believe it wasn't abandonment, it was the only way to protect you. Your father threatened to do to you what he'd done to me. He described it in detail, made it clear that if I exposed him, if I testified against him, you would suffer the consequences. He said he'd make you disappear in ways that could never be traced back to him, that he'd make it look like an accident or a runaway situation. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't watch him destroy you the way he destroyed me. My tears were falling onto the paper now, smudging the ink slightly. If there's any way back to you, I'll find it. But if I can't, if the danger is too great, or if I'm truly gone by the time you read this, know that every choice I made was out of love. You are stronger than I ever was, Kelsey. Even as a child, you had a core of steel I never possessed. Don't let him make you believe you're anything less than extraordinary. Don't let him shape you into someone who serves his needs at the expense of your own soul. Fight back. Expose him, take back everything he stole, and live the life I couldn't give you, one built on truth and freedom, not fear and obligation. All my love, always and forever, Mom. I sat there in that cafe booth, clutching my mother's letter, crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. Margaret moved to sit beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders while I sobbed for everything I'd lost and everything I'd never had. When I could finally speak, my voice came out raw and broken. I need to go home. I need to get that picture frame. Margaret's expression turned cautious. Kelsey, if your father has been monitoring you, he might be watching your apartment. You need to be strategic about this. But I was already standing, shoving the letter back into the envelope with trembling hands. I've spent 17 years being careful, being strategic, doing what everyone expected. My mother gave up her entire life to keep me safe. The least I can do is honor that sacrifice by finishing what she started. I left the cafe and took a rideshare directly to my apartment building, my heart hammering the entire way. The picture frame was waiting just where I'd left it, innocent and familiar, on my nightstand. I picked it up with reverent hands, turning it over to examine the backing. There, so small I'd never noticed it in all the years I'd owned the frame, was a tiny QR code etched into the silver metal. My mother's secret legacy, her insurance policy, her final gift to me. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and positioned it to scan the code. Just as my finger was about to press the button, someone knocked loudly on my apartment door. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small space like gunshots. My father's voice called through the door. "Kelsey, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Open the door." I stood frozen in my apartment, the picture frame clutched in one hand and my phone in the other, while my father's knocking grew more insistent. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, to pretend I wasn't home, but I knew he wouldn't believe that. My car was in the parking garage. My lights were on. He knew I was here. With trembling hands, I positioned my phone's camera over the QR code and pressed scan. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, and I thought maybe the code was too old, too faded, that 17 years had erased my mother's careful planning. Then my screen flickered and a secure login page appeared requesting a password. The knocking stopped. My father's voice came through the door, measured and calm in that way that always preceded something terrible. "Kelsey, sweetheart, I can hear you in there. I just want to talk. We're family. We should be able to discuss things like adults." I stared at the password field. What would my mother have chosen? Something. I'd know something meaningful enough that I'd figure it out, but obscure enough that my father never would. My birthday. Too obvious. Her birthday, the same. Then I remembered something from one of our trips to that cafe, the way she'd always ordered the same thing, and smiled when I'd asked why. I typed, "Blue Sky Mocha, 1998. The screen unlocked immediately, and suddenly I was looking at a file directory containing hundreds of documents, photos, videos, and audio files, all meticulously organized by date and category. My mother had been documenting everything, building a case against my father with the same precision she'd once brought to running her business. The pounding resumed harder now. "Kelsey, open this door right now. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we're going to talk." I started downloading everything to my phone, my laptop, and a cloud backup service Margaret had helped me set up that morning. The first files that caught my attention were spreadsheets showing money flowing through Diamore Consulting in amounts that made my head spin. Services billed to companies with names like Apex Holdings and Meridian Solutions, all for consulting work that had never actually been performed. Next to each entry, my mother had made notes. "Wire transfer from offshore account," and "Client has ties to Kozlov organization." I clicked on a folder labeled Forged Documents and felt my stomach drop. There were photos of contracts and financial agreements bearing my signature, but from when I was a child. A loan application supposedly signed by me at age 16. Business documents where I was listed as an officer of the trust at age 12. My mother had photographed every piece of fraud she could find, dated and documented with her characteristic thoroughness. The videos were worse. Short clips clearly filmed covertly showing my father in what looked like hotel conference rooms and private offices, meeting with men in expensive suits. The audio was surprisingly clear. My mother must have been wearing a wire, or had planted recording devices. I clicked on one dated July 2007 and heard my father's voice discussing cleaning $3 million through the tech consulting front, with a man whose face I didn't recognize, but whose Eastern European accent was unmistakable. My father was trying the doorknob now, jiggling it insistently. "I'm losing patience, Kelsey. You don't want to make me angry." I found the medical records next. Prescriptions for Xanax Ambien and something called haloperidol, all written for Diane Morris by a Dr. Raymond Voss. But there were pharmacy receipts showing Michael Morris picking up the medications, not my mother. Dates and times proving my father had regular access to drugs designed to sedate, confuse, and control. Then I found the audio file dated September 15, 2008, just 3 weeks before my mother disappeared. My hand hovered over the play button for only a second before I pressed it. My mother's voice came through shaking but determined. "I know what you've been doing with my company, Michael. I have proof. I've been documenting everything for months." My father's response was chillingly calm, almost bored. "Diane, if you're smart, you'll forget what you think you know. You're not thinking clearly. You never do when you're having one of your episodes." "Don't gaslight me. I'm not crazy. I have recordings, documents, everything, and if anything happens to me, it all goes to the FBI." There was a long pause. Then my father's voice changed, became softer, more dangerous. "Remember what happened to Caroline's first husband when he asked too many questions about family business? Accidents happen, Diane. Tragic, unavoidable accidents." Another pause, then the threat that made my blood run cold. "And if you won't think of yourself, think of Kelsey. She's 15. Such a vulnerable age. Would be a shame if she had to go through what you went through as a teenager. You remember that, don't you? How easy it is to make a young girl disappear. How no one questions it when they're troubled, unstable, just like their mother." The recording ended. I stood there, my entire body shaking, understanding finally what leverage my father had held over my mother. He'd threatened to do to me exactly what he'd done to her. My phone buzzed with an urgent text from Margaret. "Don't open the door. Go out the fire escape, now. I'm parked 2 blocks east on Marion Street." I looked around my apartment, frantically shoving my laptop into a backpack, grabbing the picture frame and my mother's letter. The downloads were still running, a progress bar creeping toward completion at an agonizing pace. 73%, 79%. My father's tone shifted, the patient facade crumbling. "Kelsey, I know you're in there. We need to talk about the questions you've been asking the people you've been meeting with. You're making some very poor decisions just like your mother did." 88%, 92%. "Open this door or I'm calling building security, or maybe I'll just use the spare key I kept from when I helped you move in. You remember that, don't you? I helped you set up this whole apartment. I know every inch of it." The download hit 100%. I grabbed my things and ran to the bedroom window that opened onto the fire escape. My hands fumbled with the latch, precious seconds ticking away as I heard my father's voice at the door change from patient to something much darker. "I know you found your mother's files, Kelsey. You've made a terrible mistake, the same mistake she made, and we both know how that ended for her." I got the window open and climbed out onto the metal platform, my legs shaking as I started down the ladder. Behind me, I heard the apartment door crash open, the sound of splintering wood as my father forced his way inside. His footsteps moved through the apartment, quick and purposeful, heading straight for the bedroom. I was 2 flights down when I heard him at the window above me, his voice carrying through the cold evening air with perfect, terrifying clarity. "Run if you want, Kelsey, but you can't hide from family. You'll learn that lesson one way or another." Margaret's car was exactly where she'd said it would be, a nondescript sedan idling 2 blocks from my apartment building. I threw myself into the passenger seat, gasping for breath, my backpack clutched against my chest like armor. She pulled away from the curb before I'd even closed the door properly, her eyes constantly checking the mirrors. "Did he see you?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I don't know. Maybe. He was at my apartment door then inside. I heard him at the window when I was climbing down. Then we assume he knows you have the files. That changes everything. She navigated through downtown traffic with practiced efficiency, taking sudden turns that would make us harder to follow. I'm taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere he won't think to look. 20 minutes later, we pulled into an underground parking garage attached to a modern office building in the financial district. Margaret led me through a maze of corridors to a suite on the 14th floor with frosted glass doors bearing the name Wu and Associates Attorneys at Law. The reception area was empty, the overhead lights dimmed for after hours. But a light glowed from an interior office, and a moment later a man emerged. He was in his late 50s with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When he saw me, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something that looked like recognition and genuine anger. "My God," he said quietly. "You look exactly like Diane." Margaret made the introductions. "Kelsey, this is James Wu. James, this is Diane's daughter." James shook my hand with both of his, a gesture that felt less like professional greeting and more like condolence. "I'm so sorry about your mother. I tried to help her. I should have tried harder." He led us into his office and closed the door, gesturing for me to sit, while Margaret remained standing by the window watching the street below. I pulled out my laptop and showed him everything, the files my mother had hidden, the forged documents, the recordings, the medical evidence. James reviewed it all with methodical precision, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through page after page of documentation. "I was your mother's attorney," he said, finally sitting back in his chair. "In 2007, when she first started suspecting something was wrong with her company's finances. She came to me with questions about the trust your father had established about transfers of company assets that didn't make sense to her. I reviewed the documents and immediately saw red flags. The signatures didn't match her typical signature patterns. The trust structure gave your father far more control than she'd been led to believe. I told her the document transfers looked fraudulent." He paused, old frustration evident in his expression. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from a law firm representing your father threatening me with a malpractice lawsuit for interfering in family matters and attempting to create conflict in a marriage. They accused me of trying to bilk your mother for unnecessary legal fees by manufacturing problems that didn't exist. The letter made it clear that if I continued to advise her, they would not only sue me, but would file complaints with the Bar Association that could end my career. "You backed off," I said, not accusingly, but understanding. "I did, and I've regretted it every day since. I tried to warn Diane, privately told her to find another attorney who could help her, but a month later, she disappeared. When I read her obituary, I knew something was wrong. I went to the police with my suspicions, but I had no proof, just a gut feeling and professional concerns about documents I'd reviewed briefly. They told me there was no evidence of foul play, that the medical examiner had ruled her death natural causes. His voice hardened. "Your father made sure every avenue was closed before I could pursue it." James turned his attention back to my laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he organized the files, creating a chronological timeline of evidence. "Your mother's company was worth approximately $2.3 million when your father took control of it in 2008. He systematically drained it through fake consulting fees paid to shell companies he controlled. Look here. These entities have addresses that are just mail drops, no actual offices or employees. He billed hundreds of thousands for services that were never rendered, then claimed business losses to avoid paying taxes. The trust set up in your name was never meant to benefit you. It was a legal shield to hide assets and make it appear your mother had willingly transferred everything to family management." He pulled up several of the forged documents side by side, pointing out the inconsistencies. The forged signatures, the fraudulent trust documents, the use of your identity as a minor for financial transactions you couldn't legally authorize, all of this constitutes multiple felonies. We're talking fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. And given the evidence your mother collected about money laundering, we're looking at federal crimes that carry serious prison time. Add in the evidence suggesting he caused your mother's disappearance, and this becomes a case that could put him away for the rest of his life. I felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. So we can stop him. We can actually stop him. We can, James agreed. But you need to understand what you're walking into. Here's our strategy first. We file a civil suit to freeze all assets connected to the fraudulent trust. That prevents him from moving money or destroying evidence. Second, we notify the FBI about the money laundering evidence your mother's documentation connects to organized crime, which makes this federal jurisdiction. Third, we request that local police reopen the investigation into your mother's disappearance, providing them with the evidence that suggests foul play. He leaned forward, his expression serious. But Kelsey, your father has spent 17 years building connections and covering his tracks. When he realizes you're serious about this, when he understands you're not backing down, he will escalate. We need to document everything he says and does from this point forward. Every threat, every attempt at contact, every move he makes. Which means you'll need to engage with him strategically, stay visible enough that he makes mistakes while staying safe enough that he can't hurt you. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my mother living under an assumed name for 17 years, sacrificing her entire life to keep me safe. I thought about the letter she'd written telling me I was stronger than she'd been. I thought about every manipulation, every guilt trip, every time my father had made me feel like I was failing some fundamental test of worthiness. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. James's phone buzzed on his desk. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. We have a problem. Your father just filed an emergency petition in family court claiming you're mentally unstable and seeking conservatorship over your finances. He's moving faster than I expected. James moved with remarkable speed. Within 48 hours of my father filing his conservatorship petition, we were standing in a King County family courtroom while a judge reviewed emergency motions from both sides. My father sat across the aisle with his attorney, a polished woman in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of confident authority that comes from winning cases like this regularly. My father himself looked every inch the concerned parent's suit, perfectly pressed expression, arranged in worried lines, occasionally glancing my way with what anyone else would interpret as paternal concern. His attorney painted a picture of a daughter in crisis. I'd collapsed at work due to stress and exhaustion. I'd been making wild accusations against family members. I'd fled my own apartment in the middle of the night, demonstrating paranoid and erratic behavior. She produced a psychiatric report from a Dr. Stephen Carmichael claiming I'd attended a consultation where I'd exhibited signs of delusional thinking, persecution complex, and inability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. The only problem was that I'd never met Dr. Carmichael in my life. James stood and calmly presented Dr. Parker's actual medical records, complete with his signed affidavit explaining that I'd suffered from chronic stress and physical exhaustion, not mental illness. He played a carefully edited audio recording I'd made on my phone of my father at my apartment door, his voice shifting from false patience to barely contained threat, as he demanded entry and mentioned mistakes, and knowing I'd found files. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, looked between both parties with visible skepticism. She denied the conservatorship petition, but ordered a full psychological evaluation from an independent expert of the court's choosing to be completed within 30 days. It wasn't a complete victory, but it bought us time. More importantly, it put my father's petition and all its fabrications into the public court record, which would matter later when prosecutors reviewed everything. Back in James's office, he laid out the next phase of our strategy. Your father just revealed how desperate he is. Filing for conservatorship was a massive overreach, and now there's a court record of him trying to have you declared incompetent based on a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. But he's also on high alert now. If we come at him directly, he'll lawyer up completely and we'll lose the advantage your mother's evidence gives us. So what do? I asked. We make him think he's won. You back down, apologize for your overreaction, agree to work things out as a family. Let him believe his intimidation tactics worked. When people feel secure, they get sloppy. They say things they shouldn't, make moves they wouldn't if they thought someone was watching. Every instinct rebelled against the idea of pretending to submit to my father again. But I thought about my mother, how she'd gathered evidence for months while pretending everything was fine, and I understood that sometimes survival requires performance. I sent my father a carefully worded text. "I've been overwhelmed and not thinking clearly. I want to work things out as a family. I'm sorry for causing problems." His response came within seconds. "I knew you'd come to your senses. Come to dinner Sunday at 6. We'll fix everything and move forward together." The speed and confidence of his reply told me everything. He thought he'd broken me, thought I'd fallen back into the old pattern of compliance. He had no idea I was documenting every word, building a case that would demolish the life he'd constructed on lies. 3 days later, my phone rang at nearly midnight. Emma's name flashed on the screen. My sister and I hadn't been close in years. My father's different treatment of us had created a distance neither of us had known how to bridge. But when I answered, I could hear immediately that something was terribly wrong. "Kelsey." Her voice was thick with tears, shaking with fear or shock or both. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you years ago, but I was scared and I didn't understand what it meant." "Emma, what's wrong?" "I've always known Dad lied about some things. I used to hear him and Caroline arguing late at night when they thought I was asleep. They'd talk about keeping the story straight, about Diane, about making sure certain things stayed buried. I never understood what they meant, and when I asked Dad about it once, he told me I'd misheard, that I was making up stories." I gripped the phone tighter. "What else, Emma?" "A few months ago, I did one of those genetic ancestry tests. You know, the ones where you send in your DNA and they tell you about your heritage. I thought it would be fun, maybe find some distant cousins or something." Her voice broke. "The results came back last week. Kelsey, according to the DNA analysis, we're not full sisters. We only share about 25% of our genetic material. We're half siblings." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a mistake. But I looked up what it means, and there's no other explanation. We have the same mother but different fathers, or the same father but different mothers. And since we were both supposedly born to Diane and raised by Dad— She trailed off, the implication hanging heavy between us. "Emma, where are you right now?" "At home. Dad doesn't know about the test results. I haven't told anyone except you." "Don't tell him. Don't tell Caroline. Don't tell anyone. Can you come to where I'm staying? I'll text you the address. We need to talk in person." "Kelsey, I'm scared. Dad isn't just hiding what happened to Mom." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly would make them more real. "He's hiding who I really am." Emma arrived at James's office 20 minutes later, her face blotchy from crying mascara smudged under her eyes. She looked younger than her 28 years, vulnerable and frightened in a way that made me want to protect her, even though my own world was crumbling. Margaret had stayed with me, and James had agreed to let us use his conference room for privacy. We sat across from each other at the long table, and for a moment neither of us knew how to begin. "Tell me everything," I said finally. Emma pulled out her phone and showed me the genetic ancestry results. The screen displayed a family tree with percentages and relationships mapped out in clean scientific certainty. According to the analysis, Emma and I shared approximately 25% of our DNA. The amount consistent with half-siblings who share one parent, not the 50% we should have shared as full sisters. "I didn't understand it at first," Emma said, her voice still shaky. "I thought maybe the test was wrong, or maybe there was some kind of mix-up with the samples, but I researched it and there's no mistake. This percentage means we either have the same mother and different fathers, or the same father and different mothers. And since we were both supposedly Diane's daughters," I said slowly, working through the implications. I didn't want to believe it. I kept thinking there had to be another explanation. But then I remembered all those arguments I used to overhear between Dad and Caroline, the way they'd sometimes look at each other when they thought no one was watching. So I confronted Caroline. Not Dad, I was too scared to ask him. But Caroline. Emma's hands were shaking as she continued. She fell apart immediately, started crying and saying she never meant for any of this to happen. She told me that she and Dad had an affair that started before you were even born. It continued for years, all through your childhood. When Diane was pregnant with you, Caroline was already sleeping with your father. The betrayal was so massive, so complete, that I felt numb rather than shocked. Of course it had been Caroline all along. Caroline got pregnant with me when you were about 3 years old, Emma continued. She wanted Dad to leave Diane and marry her, but he refused, said it would destroy his reputation, hurt his business connections, make everything complicated. So they came up with a plan. Caroline would pretend to be in a relationship with some guy no one knew well, then claim he'd abandoned her when she got pregnant. Diane, being Diane, offered to help raise me. She thought she was supporting her sister through a difficult time. She had no idea I was actually her husband's child. I closed my eyes, imagining my mother's kindness being weaponized against her, her generosity turned into the instrument of her own destruction. When did she find out? I asked. Around 2007. Caroline said Diane found some financial records that didn't make sense, payments to Caroline that weren't explained, documents with weird notations. She started asking questions, digging into things. Eventually, she found evidence of the affair, hotel receipts, text messages, something concrete. She confronted both of them and said she wanted a divorce, that she was going to expose everything. And that's when he started drugging her, I said. When he began systematically destroying her credibility so that if she tried to tell anyone, they'd think she was delusional. Emma nodded miserably. Caroline said Dad told her it was the only way to protect their secret, to protect me. He convinced Caroline that if Diane exposed them, I'd be destroyed by the scandal, that everyone would treat me differently if they knew the truth. So Caroline went along with it. She helped him gaslight. Diane helped maintain the lie. She convinced herself she was protecting her daughter. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. Emma hadn't been favored because she was the baby or because she had some special charm. She'd been favored because she was my father's child, with the woman he actually wanted. All those years of watching my sister get away with everything while I was held to impossible standards, it wasn't personality or birth order. It was biology and betrayal. And my mother, my kind, generous mother, had been systematically destroyed by her husband and her own sister, the two people she should have been able to trust most. Caroline's cruelty toward Mom wasn't just jealousy or competition, I said, understanding flooding through me. It was guilt. She'd stolen her sister's husband, had his child let him abuse Diane to protect their secret. That kind of guilt turns into anger, into justification. She had to make Mom the villain to live with what she'd done. And you, Emma said, tears streaming down her face again. You were kept around not because Dad loved you, but because abandoning you would raise questions. You were part of the facade that made everything look normal. The truth was devastating, but it was also clarifying. I wasn't inherently unworthy of my father's love. There was no standard I could have met, no level of perfection that would have earned his approval, because I'd never been his daughter in any meaningful sense. I'd been a prop in the elaborate performance he and Caroline had constructed. Emma reached across the table and grabbed my hands. I'm going to help you. I don't care that he's my biological father. What he did to your mom, to you, to everyone, it's unforgivable. I spent my whole life thinking I was special, that I was loved, but it was all built on destroying your mother. Tell me what you need me to do. The alliance shifted everything. Emma had access to parts of the house I'd never see again. She could record conversations without raising suspicion. She knew Caroline's patterns, her weaknesses, the places where the carefully constructed lies might crack under pressure. Sunday dinner, I said. We need you at Sunday dinner. We need you to be exactly who they expect you to be, the favored daughter, the one who always does what Dad wants. Can you do that? Emma's jaw set with determination I'd never seen in her before. I can do that. And there's something else. I think I know where Dad keeps the documents Mom was trying to hide, the originals, the ones that prove everything. He has a locked filing cabinet in his home office. I've seen him go to it late at night when he thinks everyone's asleep. I think that's where he keeps anything that could incriminate him. Can you get into it? The lock is old. I've watched him open it enough times that I think I can figure it out. But we'd need a distraction, something to keep him and Caroline occupied long enough for me to get upstairs and photograph everything. I looked at Margaret and then back at Emma. We have to get them during Sunday dinner, when everyone's distracted. Emma nodded. Then that's what we'll do. Sunday arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I stood outside my father's house at exactly 6 o'clock, my phone recording in my jacket pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the house where I'd grown up, where I'd spent my childhood trying desperately to be good enough, never understanding that the game was rigged from the start. Now I was walking back in as someone different, someone who knew the truth, and was gathering evidence to destroy the man who'd destroyed my mother. I rang the doorbell and arranged my face into the expression of apologetic submission my father would expect. When he opened the door, his smile was warm, victorious, the smile of someone who believed he'd won. "Kelsey, sweetheart, come in. We're so glad you came to your senses." He pulled me into a hug that felt like a power play, his hand on the back of my head, holding me just a moment too long. "Family is everything. I knew you'd remember that eventually." Caroline emerged from the kitchen, her smile brittle but present. "Dinner's almost ready. Emma's already here helping me with the salad." The dining room table was set with my mother's good china, the plates she'd carefully collected over years now being used in a house where her memory had been systematically erased and rewritten. I sat in my usual chair, the one I'd occupied at countless family dinners, and prepared to give the performance of my life. Emma came in carrying a salad bowl, her expression perfectly calibrated to convey the slightly vapid cheerfulness she'd always been allowed to project. But when our eyes met for just a second, I saw the steel underneath. She set the bowl down and launched into a meandering story about a coworker's dating drama, the kind of trivial narrative that had always made my father indulgent and Caroline dismissive. Under the table, hidden from view, Emma's foot found mine. 2 deliberate kicks the signal. I picked up the thread of conversation, smoothly asking Caroline about her garden, inquiring about my father's golf game, drawing them both into the comfortable rhythm of talking about themselves. I asked about family memories, old vacations we'd taken, prompting them to relax into nostalgia. My father told a story about a fishing trip, embellishing details, making himself the hero. Caroline laughed at all the right moments, her guard lowering as the wine flowed and the evening took on the familiar pattern they'd always controlled. Emma excused herself quietly. "I'll be right back. Too much coffee earlier." Neither my father nor Caroline even glanced her way, too absorbed in their own performance of family harmony. Upstairs, I knew Emma was moving through the hallway to my father's home office, the room that had always been off-limits during my childhood. I'd coached her through every step. The filing cabinet would be on the right side of the desk. The lock was an old tumbler mechanism that could be picked with a paperclip if you knew the technique, which I'd learned from a security training at work and taught her yesterday. I kept talking, asking more questions, drawing out longer answers. Time stretched impossibly, every second feeling like an hour, while Emma was upstairs gathering evidence that could send my father to prison for decades. Then I heard footsteps above us, too heavy to be Emma's. My father's wine glass paused halfway to his lips, his eyes tracking toward the ceiling. "Emma, you okay up there?" His voice carried up the stairs, casual but with an edge of suspicion. My heart stopped. Caroline was looking toward the stairway now too, her expression shifting from relaxed to alert. Then Emma's voice, perfectly pitched with just the right note of embarrassment. "Just sick from lunch. Be down in a minute." The toilet flushed. Water ran in the sink. My father's shoulders relaxed slightly, but he stood anyway, moving toward the stairs. I held my breath as Emma appeared at the top, her face slightly flushed, one hand on her stomach in the universal gesture of digestive distress. "You all right?" my father asked, but he was studying her with eyes that missed nothing. Yeah, just that food truck sandwich I had earlier. Should have known better. She moved past him down the stairs and I saw her phone tucked into her back pocket. She'd done it. We made it through the main course with me playing my role perfectly apologetic, grateful, eager to make amends. But as dessert was being served, I decided it was time to execute the second part of our plan, the provocation that would make them reveal themselves while we were recording everything. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. I said, my tone carefully casual as I pushed cherry pie around my plate. With everything that's happened, I realize I don't actually remember much about how she died. I was so young and I think maybe I've been avoiding thinking about it. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Caroline's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My father's genial expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "That's natural," Caroline said quickly, too quickly. "Grief makes memory difficult. But I'd like to understand it better now." I continued, looking directly at Caroline. "How did Mom really die? You always said it was her heart, but I was talking to Dr. Parker. You remember him, the ER doctor, and he said there was no heart condition in her medical records. That struck me as odd." My father's hand tightened on his wine glass. "Why are you bringing this up now, Kelsey? It's been 17 years. Some things are better left in the past." "I just want to remember her accurately," I said, maintaining my innocent tone. "Shouldn't I know the truth about my own mother's death? The truth is that your mother was very ill." Caroline interjected, her voice sharp now. "Mentally ill. She had episodes, delusions. The doctors said her heart gave out from the stress of her condition." "Which doctors?" "Because Dr. Parker said—" My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. His charming mask had completely fallen away, replaced by something cold and dangerous that I remembered from childhood, the face he wore right before he delivered punishments for infractions I'd never understood. "I think it's time for you to leave, Kelsey." His voice was ice. "You've been making wild accusations, inventing conspiracy theories, trying to turn family members against each other. This dinner was supposed to be about reconciliation, but clearly you're not capable of that." He moved toward me, and I instinctively stood, putting the table between us. "Maybe it's time we stopped pretending you're part of this family," he continued, each word precisely measured and sharp as a blade. "You're not Diane's daughter in any way that matters. You're just a reminder of mistakes and problems that should have been dealt with years ago." The confession was subtler than I'd hoped for, but it was there in his words, in his willingness to disown me completely rather than answer simple questions about my mother's death. Emma was staring at him in horror, her performance forgotten. "Dad, what are you saying?" "Stay out of this, Emma," he snapped. "This is between me and Kelsey." "No," Emma said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I don't think it is." I stayed exactly where I was, meeting my father's fury with a calm I'd never possessed before. Something had shifted in me over these past days, a fundamental rewiring of the fear response he'd spent decades conditioning into me. I wasn't that little girl anymore, desperately seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "I'm part of this family whether you like it or not. This house was bought with Mom's company's money. The money you stole from her. That makes it mine too." His face darkened to a shade I'd never seen, a deep flush of rage rising from his collar. Caroline stood and tried to place a hand on his arm to de-escalate before the situation spiraled completely out of control, but he shook her off with a violent gesture that made her stumble backward. "You want the truth, Kelsey?" His voice had gone deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that used to send me running to my room as a child. "Fine. Let's talk about truth. Your mother was weak. She was pathetic. She built something successful for once in her life and then decided she had the right to question how I chose to use it. She was going to destroy everything we'd built, everything I'd worked for, because of some misplaced moral superiority." He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me retreat. "She was going to go to the authorities. She was going to ruin our lives, destroy our reputation, take away everything, including you. She thought she could just tear apart this family because she'd suddenly developed a conscience. His laugh was bitter ugly. I did what I had to do to protect this family, to protect what we'd built, to protect Emma from having her life destroyed by Diane's self-righteous crusade. The admission hung in the air between us, and I could feel Emma beside me, rigidly, still her phone under the table capturing every word. Caroline had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth as if she could somehow take back the words he was saying. "What did you do to her?" I asked, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "What did you do to my mother?" He came closer, still invading my space in that way he'd always used to intimidate to dominate. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to that quiet, controlled tone I remembered from childhood punishments, from moments when I'd disappointed him and was about to learn the consequences. "Your mother made the mistake of thinking she could outmaneuver me. She thought she was so clever hiding documents in safety deposit boxes, talking to lawyers she thought I didn't know about, planning her escape. She actually believed she could outsmart me." He smiled, and it was the most frightening expression I'd ever seen on a human face. But I always knew what she was doing. I knew about the FBI meetings. I knew about the evidence she thought she'd hidden. I knew every move she made before she made it. "How?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because I had people watching her. Because her lawyer was expensive and desperate and took money to keep me informed. Because her so-called friend Margaret wasn't as careful as she thought she was." He leaned in close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath. "And I made sure your mother understood the consequences of defiance. I made sure she knew exactly what would happen if she continued down that path." He didn't say he killed her. He didn't have to. The implication was clear in every word, every gesture, every cold calculation in his eyes. "You're making the same mistakes she did." He continued, his hand reaching out to grip my shoulder with bruising force. "You're following the same foolish path, thinking you're brave, thinking you're strong enough to challenge me. But you should ask yourself a very important question, Kelsey. Do you really want to end up like Diane?" The threat was explicit now, undeniable. He was telling me that he'd made my mother disappear and he could do the same to me. For a moment we stood there, frozen in that tableau, him gripping my shoulder, me looking up into the face of someone I'd once called father, and seeing only a monster Emma beside us recording evidence that would destroy him, and Caroline watching it all fall apart with tears streaming down her face. Then something inside me snapped free, some final chain of obligation and fear that had bound me to this man my entire life. "The difference between me and Mom," I said, pulling away from his grip, "is that I'm not alone, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." I turned to Emma and held out my hand. She took it immediately, her fingers cold and shaking, but her grip firm. We stood together, united in a way we'd never been when we thought we were full sisters, bound now by shared truth rather than shared DNA. "We're leaving," I said, looking my father directly in the eye. "And you should know everything you just said was recorded. My lawyer will have it within the hour. So will the FBI." His expression transformed through a series of rapid shifts, from rage to calculation to something that looked almost like panic. He lunged forward as if to stop us, but Emma stepped between us, her phone now visible in her hand, still recording. "Don't," she said to him, her voice shaking but determined. "Don't make it worse." We walked toward the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. Behind us, Caroline's voice rang out high and desperate. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand what he's capable of. He'll destroy you both." But we were already out the door, already moving toward my car parked at the curb. The rain had picked up cold drops, hitting my face as I fumbled with my keys. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, her entire body shaking. I drove 2 blocks before pulling over, my hands trembling too badly to continue. Emma was already uploading the video to the secure cloud storage James had set up, her fingers flying across her phone screen. "Done," she said finally. "It's uploaded. James has it. Margaret has it. Multiple backups. You were incredible in there, I told her. You saved us. Kelsey. Her voice was strange, tight, with something I couldn't identify. There's something else in those photos I took from the filing cabinet. I didn't want to say anything inside, but I looked through them while you were keeping them distracted. What did you find? She pulled up the images on her phone and zoomed in on one particular document. It was a travel itinerary dated for 2 weeks from now. 2 tickets to Sao Paulo, Brazil. One-way tickets. And a rental agreement for an apartment signed under a name that wasn't my father's, but with his distinctive signature style. I think Dad was planning to leave the country, Emma whispered. And he was only taking one person with him. We drove straight to James's office, both of us still shaking from adrenaline and shock. It was nearly 9 o'clock on a Sunday evening, but James had told us he'd be waiting, that whatever we found would require immediate action. Margaret was already there when we arrived, her face grave with concern. James spread Emma's photographs across his conference table, examining each one with methodical precision. The travel documents were damning in their specificity: 2 tickets on LATAM Airlines to Sao Paulo, Brazil, departing in exactly 21 days. Not round trip, one way. Purchased 3 days after I'd collapsed at work, dated December 28th, the day after my hospitalization. Brazil has no extradition treaty with the United States. James explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Once he's there, getting him back would be nearly impossible without cooperation from Brazilian authorities, which can take years to secure if it happens at all. He pulled up another photograph showing a rental agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in Sao Paulo's upscale Jardins district, signed under the name Robert Davidson, with bank references and a year's rent paid in advance. But the signature style was unmistakable: my father's distinctive forward slant and the way he crossed his T's. The most damning documents were bank authorizations already signed and dated, ready to be executed. They showed plans to transfer $750,000 to a Brazilian bank account through a series of intermediary transactions designed to obscure the money's origin. The account was established 2 months ago, suggesting this escape plan had been in development long before I'd even started asking questions. There are only 2 tickets, Emma said, her voice hollow. One for him, one for me. Margaret leaned forward to examine the booking details. He purchased them the moment you became a liability, Kelsey. The instant he realized you might start investigating, he activated his exit strategy. But he wasn't taking Caroline. He wasn't taking you. Just Emma. Emma's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was going to take me away from everything I know, everyone I know. Let Kelsey take the blame for all the debt, let Caroline face whatever charges came from being his accomplice, and just start over, like none of this mattered, like I was just some possession he could take with him. James nodded grimly. That's exactly what he planned, and legally it would have worked perfectly for him. If he'd gotten you out of the country before Kelsey filed suit, before law enforcement moved against him, it would have been nearly impossible to recover any assets. You're an adult, so no one could claim kidnapping. He'd argue you left voluntarily. You would have been both hostage and shield. Keeping you close would prevent Kelsey from pursuing him too aggressively for fear of what might happen to you, and your presence would make him look like a caring father rather than a fleeing criminal. And Caroline, I asked, though I already knew the answer, would have been left behind to face criminal charges alone, conspiracy fraud being an accessory to financial crimes. She sacrificed her relationship with her sister, helped destroy Diane, bore his child in secret, and maintained his lies for nearly 30 years. And his reward for her loyalty was to abandon her the moment things got difficult. The cruelty of it was so vast, so calculated, that it took my breath away. Emma was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I thought he loved me. I thought I was special. But I was just useful. Just another tool he could use. I put my arm around her and she buried her face in my shoulder. The sister I'd resented for years. The sister I'd thought had everything. While I had nothing, turned out to be just as much a victim as I was, just packaged differently. James was already on his phone making calls despite the late hour. We have 3 weeks maximum before those flights, he said between calls. But realistically, we have far less time than that. Now that he knows you have information, now that he realizes you're not backing down, he's going to accelerate his timeline. We need to file everything tonight: emergency motions to freeze assets, criminal complaints with both local and federal authorities, injunctions preventing him from leaving the country. We need marshals ready to execute arrest warrants the moment judges sign them. He hung up one call and immediately dialed another. The problem is the system moves slowly even in emergencies. Getting judges to sign warrants on a Sunday night, coordinating between local police and federal agencies, freezing international bank transfers, all of this takes time we don't have. Margaret was on her phone as well, texting rapidly. I'm contacting the FBI agent who handled Diane's case originally. If we can frame this as a continuation of that investigation, we might be able to move faster through federal channels. Emma had stopped crying and was wiping her face, her expression hardening into something I recognized, because I felt it too. Determination born from betrayal. Strength forged from discovering you're capable of much more than anyone ever let you believe. What can I do? She asked. There has to be something I can do to help. You've already done more than you know, James said. These documents are... His phone lit up with an alert and his face went pale. He showed me the screen. It was a notification from a financial monitoring service, the same kind I used. The alert showed a transaction Michael Morris had just made: a $50,000 ATM withdrawal split across multiple machines to bypass daily limits. The timestamp was 11 minutes ago. He's running, James said. He's not waiting 3 weeks. He knows you have evidence and he's running right now. James was already dialing before I could fully process what the alert meant. He had the FBI agent, Special Agent Sarah Reeves, on speaker, within seconds his words coming in rapid-fire bursts as he explained the escape plan, the tickets, the withdrawal, the urgency of the situation. We have recordings of him essentially admitting to making Diane Morris disappear, James said. We have forged documents, evidence of money laundering, proof of flight risk. He just withdrew $50,000 in cash and he has a private charter booked. We need emergency warrants now. Agent Reeves's response was immediate and professional. Send me everything you have. I'm calling a federal magistrate right now. If the evidence is as strong as you say, I can have warrants within 2 hours. 2 hours felt like an eternity, but there was no way around the legal process, even in emergencies. James transmitted files while Margaret made additional calls, activating a network of contacts I hadn't known existed. Emma sat beside me, both of us frozen in this strange, suspended moment between the life we'd known and whatever came next. The warrants came through at 11:30. Agent Reeves called back with new information that made my stomach drop. He's not using SeaTac. He booked a private charter out of Renton Municipal Airport. Small operation, minimal security. We've alerted airport personnel, but the flight plan shows departure in 45 minutes. We piled into James's car, me, Emma, James, and Margaret, while Agent Reeves coordinated with local FBI and police. The drive to Renton took 20 minutes that felt like hours. My hands clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. Every red light felt like a conspiracy to let him escape. We arrived to find the small airport's private terminal lit up with emergency vehicles. 2 FBI vehicles were already there, agents moving with purposeful urgency. Agent Reeves met us at the entrance, her expression grim but determined. He's on the tarmac, planes ready to go. We've ordered them to stand down, but we need to move now. We followed her through the terminal and out onto the tarmac, where a sleek private jet sat with its stairs extended. And there, at the base of those stairs, I saw my father for the first time since the dinner confrontation. He was dressed casually in expensive travel clothes, a carry-on bag at his feet, looking every inch the successful businessman embarking on a well-earned vacation. And beside him, Caroline, her face twisted with rage and betrayal, was screaming at him. You said we'd go together. You promised we'd start over, that we'd finally be together without hiding. You said Brazil was for us, for our future. His response was delivered with cold, clinical precision. You were useful, Caroline. Past tense. You really thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with my mistress. You were a convenience, a tool. just like everyone else. Caroline's legs seemed to give out and she collapsed to her knees on the tarmac, sobbing. FBI agents moved past her, surrounding the plane, weapons drawn but pointed safely down. The pilot emerged with his hands raised clearly, wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. Agent Reeves called out, "Michael Morris, you're under arrest. Step away from the aircraft." My father's expression cycled through several calculations before settling on a smile. I recognized the charming, reasonable expression he used when he needed to convince someone he was the victim of misunderstanding. "Agent Reeves, I believe this is all a terrible misunderstanding. I'm simply taking a business trip. My daughter has been unwell, making accusations that have no basis in reality. I have documentation from a psychiatrist." The psychiatrist who fabricated a report about a patient he never met. James stepped forward. "We have recordings of you admitting to making your wife disappear. We have evidence of money laundering, fraud, and a dozen other felonies. The performance is over." My father's eyes found me then, and he tried one more angle. "Kelsey, sweetheart, you don't understand the people I'm connected to. If you pursue this, if you push this investigation, there will be consequences. Serious consequences. For everyone involved. This isn't a threat, it's reality. Walk away now and everyone stays safe." But I'd heard that tone before, that blend of intimidation masked as concern. It had worked on me for 32 years. It wouldn't work anymore. Agents moved forward with handcuffs. My father's mask finally completely shattered. "Everything I did was for this family. Your mother would have destroyed us all with her self-righteous crusade. She was going to tear everything apart." "No," I said, stepping closer, close enough to see the panic in his eyes. "Mom didn't try to destroy the family. She tried to save it from you, and she saved me even if it took me 17 years to understand how." I turned to Agent Reeves as they secured the handcuffs. "He has information about my mother's whereabouts in 2008. Her disappearance. I want answers about what really happened to her." As agents began leading him toward a waiting vehicle, my father's composure finally cracked completely. He twisted back toward me, his voice rising to a shout. "She's gone, Kelsey. She's been gone for 17 years. Let it go. Stop digging into things that don't matter anymore." But the desperation in his voice suggested something different. Suggested he was lying even now. Agent Reeves watched him being secured in the FBI vehicle, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She gestured for me to step away from the others to a quiet corner of the tarmac where we could speak privately. "Kelsey, about your mother," she said quietly. "There's something you need to know. Something that's been classified for 17 years. She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "Your mother isn't dead. She's been in federal witness protection since 2008. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced off my brain like sounds in a language I'd never learned. My mother wasn't dead. After 17 years of grief, of missing her, of building my entire adult life around the hole her death had left, she'd been alive the entire time." Agent Reeves guided Emma and me away from the chaos of the arrest into a small private office in the airport's administrative building. James and Margaret followed, and we all sat in stunned silence while Agent Reeves pulled out a thick file marked with classification stamps and codes I didn't understand. "In 2008, your mother came to the FBI with evidence that your father was laundering money for a criminal organization called the Kozlov Group. They have ties to Eastern European fraud networks, identity theft operations, and several other illegal enterprises. Diane had been documenting everything: financial records, recordings of meetings, client lists. She wanted to cooperate fully to help us build a case that would take down not just your father, but his entire network of associates." Emma was gripping my hand so tightly I could feel her pulse hammering against my palm. "We agreed to help her to provide protection while she continued gathering evidence. But before we could move forward with the investigation, someone leaked information about her cooperation. We still don't know who, but suddenly there were direct threats against her life. And more specifically, threats against you, Kelsey. Your father made it clear that if Diane testified, if she proceeded with exposing him, you would have an accident. He had the resources and connections to make it happen." The airport office felt too small, the walls pressing in, as Agent Reeves continued. The decision was made at the highest levels to place your mother in witness protection. We faked her death, created medical records, showing a cardiac event, held a funeral with a closed casket that actually contained weighted bags. We gave her a new identity, relocated her to another state, and buried the entire investigation in classified files. Your father believed he'd won. He thought she was dead, thought the threat to his operations had been eliminated. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. "Why did I have to think she was dead?" Agent Reeves's expression was pained. "Your mother fought that decision desperately. She wanted to take you with her into protection. But Kelsey, you were 15 years old. You were in high school. You had friends, a life. If you'd suddenly disappeared along with your mother, your father would have immediately suspected what really happened. The psychological evaluators warned us that if you knew the truth, you'd either consciously or unconsciously reveal it, maybe through a slip of the tongue, a change in behavior, anything that might tip him off." "So you let me grieve," I said, anger mixing with the shock. "You let me spend 17 years thinking she was dead." "We told Diane that the only way to keep you safe was to let you believe she was gone. It destroyed her to make that choice, but she made it anyway because she loved you more than she loved herself." Agent Reeves opened the file and showed me a stack of sealed envelopes, each one marked with a date. "She's written you a letter every year on your birthday. 17 letters. We kept them all waiting for the day when it would be safe enough to deliver them." I stared at the envelopes, my mother's handwriting on each one, and couldn't stop the tears that came. Emma was crying too, overwhelmed by everything we'd learned in the past few hours. "She's alive," I whispered. "My mother is alive." "She's been living in Phoenix under the name Catherine Walsh," Agent Reeves said gently. "She works as a financial consultant, different industry, different company, but using the skills she's always had. She's been monitored by our office for 17 years, never breaking cover, living a quiet life while watching from a distance as you built yours. I want to see her." My voice was stronger now, certain despite the chaos of emotions. "I need to see her." Agent Reeves nodded. "She wants to see you too. But I need you to understand something. She's not the same woman you remember. 17 years in witness protection, living with the guilt of leaving you, the isolation of a completely new identity, it changes a person profoundly. And you're not the 15-year-old girl she left behind. You're a grown woman she doesn't really know anymore. This reunion won't be simple or easy. There will be complicated emotions on both sides." "I don't care," I said. "She's my mother. She sacrificed everything to protect me. The least I can do is be there for her now." Emma spoke for the first time since we'd entered the office, her voice small and uncertain. Does she know about me, about what I am?" Agent Reeves looked at Emma with surprising gentleness. "She knows everything. She's known since the beginning. And there's one more thing I need to tell you." She pulled out another document from the file. "Your mother specifically requested that Emma be allowed to come to the reunion too. She knows the truth about your parentage, Emma. She knows you're not her biological daughter, and she wants you to know that she considers you her daughter anyway, that she always has. She said, and I'm quoting her exact words here, Emma didn't choose to be born into this situation. She deserves to know she has a mother who loves her without conditions." Emma's face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands, sobbing. I put my arms around her and we held each other while the truth of everything settled over us like snow, cold and shocking, but ultimately clarifying, covering the ugly landscape of lies with something closer to truth. "When?" I asked Agent Reeves. "When can we see her?" "Why, tomorrow," she said. "We'll arrange a secure location, and Kelsey, Emma, be prepared. This will be one of the hardest and most important conversations of your lives." The secure facility was an anonymous office building in a quiet suburb, the kind of place that could house insurance adjusters or accountants without attracting any attention. Agent Reeves led Emma and me through security checkpoints and down a hallway that felt simultaneously endless and too short. My heart was beating so hard, I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in every cell of my body. Then we entered a small conference room with beige walls and fluorescent lighting, and there she was. My mother stood by the window, backlit by gray Seattle morning light, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She was 53 now, her dark hair streaked with silver lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there when I was 15. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked both exactly like I remembered, and completely different, older, yes, but also somehow more solid, more present than the fading, confused woman from my final memories of her. Our eyes met across the room and time seemed to stop. Then her composure shattered completely. "My baby," she said, her voice breaking. "My beautiful girl." We moved toward each other, and then I was in her arms, sobbing into her shoulder while she held me with the strength I'd forgotten she possessed. She smelled different. Different soap, different shampoo. But underneath that was something I recognized at a cellular level, some essential quality that meant safety, meant home, meant mother. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying over and over. "I'm so sorry. Every day I wanted to come back. Every single day for 17 years I wanted to find you, to tell you I was alive, to explain. But they said it would put you in danger, and I couldn't. I couldn't risk you." I couldn't form words, could only hold on to her like I was 15 again, and afraid of losing her. Which in a way I was. Eventually we pulled apart enough to look at each other, really look. Diane cupped my face in her hands, her thumbs wiping away my tears. "You're so beautiful. You look so strong. I've watched from a distance. Agent Reeves would send me updates photos when they could get them safely. But seeing you now, seeing who you've become..." Her voice broke again, and we held each other while 17 years of grief and loss and longing collapsed into this single, impossible moment of reunion. When we finally sat down, Emma standing uncertainly by the door, Diane began to explain everything. The full story without the protective barriers Margaret and Dr. Parker had maintained. She told us about discovering the money laundering, about trying to handle it quietly at first, by confronting my father privately, hoping he'd stop if he knew she was aware. "But he didn't stop," she said, her voice steady now, clinical, almost as if distancing herself from the trauma. "Instead, he started drugging me. Anxiety medication, antipsychotics. I didn't need sleeping pills, all prescribed by a doctor he paid off. He'd crush them into my coffee, my food. I'd wake up disoriented, unable to remember conversations we'd supposedly had. I'd lose track of time, forget appointments. He was manufacturing evidence that I was mentally unfit." I remembered those final months before she disappeared, the way she'd seemed so confused, so fragile. "I thought you were sick. I believed him when he said you were having episodes. That's what he wanted everyone to think. He was planning to have me institutionalized if I fought for custody of you. He'd already consulted lawyers about having me declared incompetent. The medical records he was building would have supported that claim." She looked directly at me, her eyes fierce despite the tears. "When I asked why you didn't fight harder to take me with you, why you didn't try to get custody..." Diane's expression crumpled with old pain. "Because he threatened to kill you if I tried. And Kelsey, I believed him absolutely. He described how he'd do it, make it look like an accident. A suicide, something that could never be traced back to him. He told me he had people who specialized in making problems disappear permanently." The clinical precision of the threat was somehow worse than raw violence would have been. I couldn't let that happen. So when the FBI offered witness protection, when they said faking my death was the only way to keep you safe, I agreed. Even though it meant losing you. Even though it meant you'd grow up thinking I'd abandoned you. Then Diane turned to Emma, who'd been standing frozen by the door, tears streaming silently down her face. My mother stood and moved toward her, slowly, carefully giving Emma space to retreat if she needed to. "Emma, I know this is overwhelming. You're probably questioning everything, who you are, where you belong, whether anything in your life was real." Emma nodded mutely. "I want you to know something, and I need you to hear it and believe it. What your biological parents did isn't your fault. You didn't ask to be born into this situation. You didn't choose the lies they built around you." Diane's voice was gentle but firm. "I held you when you were a baby. I changed your diapers and walked the floor with you when you had colic. I loved you as my daughter even after I learned the truth about your parentage. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life now, not to replace anything or anyone, but just to be here if you want me." Emma finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "Did you ever blame me for what they did, for being the reason everything fell apart?" Diane's answer came without hesitation. "Never. Not for 1 second. You were an innocent child. You are an innocent person. None of this is your fault." Emma collapsed into Diane's arms, then sobbing, and my mother held her with the same fierce protectiveness she'd shown me, proving that love isn't only about biology, it's about choice, about commitment, about showing up even when everything is impossibly complicated. After long minutes, Diane gently pulled away and reached into her bag. "There's something else I need to show you both. I kept my own records of everything, medical evidence of what he did to me. It's worse than what I've told you, and you need to know the full truth before we move forward." Diane pulled out a tablet and opened a secure folder, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was about to share. "When I realized what your father was doing to me, I started documenting everything. I set up hidden cameras in our bedroom, in the kitchen, anywhere he might think he was alone. I kept detailed journals correlating my symptoms with specific times and meals. And I managed to obtain copies of my medical records from multiple sources, including the pharmacy where he picked up medications supposedly prescribed for me." She pulled up the first document, prescription records spanning 3 years, showing medications for severe anxiety, psychotic disorders, and sleep disturbances. All written by Dr. Raymond Voss, all picked up by Michael Morris, even though the patient name was Diane Morris. I never consented to any of these medications. I never even saw Dr. Voss for psychiatric care. Your father paid him to write prescriptions without ever examining me." She showed us blood test results taken during one of her ER visits. These tests show therapeutic levels of haloperidol, an antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia and severe bipolar disorder. But I was never diagnosed with either condition. The levels in my blood were consistent with regular dosing over weeks. Then she showed us her journal pages and pages of careful notation. "Dizzy and confused after breakfast. Michael made coffee. Lost 3 hours of memory." Another entry. "Slept 16 hours. Can't remember going to bed. Michael said I took my medicine, but I don't remember that." The correlation was clear and damning. But the video footage was the most devastating evidence. Diane played a clip dated August 2007 showing their bedroom in the early morning light. My father, fully dressed for work, stood by the nightstand where a cup of coffee sat cooling. He pulled a prescription bottle from his pocket, shook out 2 pills, and crushed them methodically with the back of a spoon. Then he stirred the powder into the coffee and left the room. 20 minutes later, the camera showed my mother waking up, reaching for the coffee, drinking it while still groggy. "There are 17 videos like this," Diane said quietly. "Different dates, same pattern. The dates match up perfectly with the times I was hospitalized for psychiatric episodes." Agent Reeves, who'd been reviewing the evidence on her own device, looked up with barely contained anger. "This isn't just domestic abuse. This is premeditated assault with intent to incapacitate and control. It's criminal battery, false imprisonment through chemical restraint, and depending on the doses and combinations, it could be argued as attempted murder. Each incident is a separate felony." "There's more," Agent Reeves continued, pulling up files on her laptop. "Once your mother came forward with this information, we started investigating your father's background more thoroughly. We found 2 previous business partners from the early 2000s who reported similar patterns. Both men described sudden onset of cognitive problems, memory issues, confusion, difficulty concentrating. Both had unexplained financial irregularities in their shared ventures with your father, and both experienced sudden, nervous breakdowns that forced them out of the partnerships." She showed us the case files. Richard Pemberton, 2003. Ended up institutionalized for 6 months with what was diagnosed as acute psychotic episode. Lost his share of a software company worth $3 million. Thomas Chen, 2005. Similar story. Sudden cognitive decline, psychiatric hospitalization, forced to sell his shares for a fraction of their value. We're reopening both cases now as potential poisoning investigations. The pattern was clear and horrifying. My father hadn't just destroyed my mother, he'd been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened his control or discovered his criminal activities for at least 25 years. Emma was staring at the evidence with the expression of dawning horror. How many people has he hurt? How many lives has he destroyed? We're still investigating, Agent Reeves said. But the money laundering connections alone suggest he's been involved with organized crime since the mid-90s. The number of potential victims is significant. I felt something settle in my chest, a cold, clear understanding that changed everything I'd believed about my life. My father wasn't just a controlling parent or even an abusive husband. He was a psychopath who viewed people as tools or obstacles, nothing more. Love, loyalty, family. These were concepts he understood intellectually and used strategically but didn't actually feel. My mother hadn't been weak. She'd been targeted by someone who specialized in breaking people, and she'd managed to survive and escape. Caroline wasn't just a mistress who'd stolen her sister's husband. She was another victim who'd chosen complicity as a survival strategy, who'd convinced herself that cooperation would keep her safe. And I had never been a daughter to him. I'd been a useful resource for maintaining his facade of normalcy and accessing my mother's money. Nothing I could have done would have earned his genuine love because he was fundamentally incapable of it. The realization was devastating, but it was also strangely liberating. I could stop wondering what I'd done wrong, stop trying to understand why I'd never been enough. The problem had never been me. It had always been him. My phone rang, interrupting the heavy silence, James's name on the screen. I answered on speaker. "The arraignment is tomorrow at 10 a.m., he said without preamble. Federal prosecutors are charging him with 23 felonies: fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, money, laundering, assault, battery, conspiracy, and several others. But Kelsey, you need to know his lawyers are already floating a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "They want him to plead to the financial crimes in exchange for dropping the assault charges related to Diane. 8 to 12 years instead of potentially life. And there's one more thing." James paused. "They want you to make a statement saying you don't believe he intended to harm you, that you support a reduced sentence. His lawyers are going to argue that family reconciliation is possible and that your testimony about his character could help the judge see him as redeemable." I looked at my mother, at the evidence of years of systematic abuse spread across the table, at Emma's devastated face. "What do I say?" James's response was immediate. "That's entirely up to you. But you should know whatever you decide will significantly impact the case." James arranged a meeting with the federal prosecutors the following morning. We gathered in their downtown office, me, Emma, Diane, James, and 2 assistant U.S. attorneys who laid out the plea bargain terms with clinical precision. "Your father is willing to plead guilty to the financial crimes: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, identity theft. In exchange, we'd drop the charges related to assault, battery, and the drugging of your mother. He'd serve 8 to 12 years in federal prison, and he's agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation into the Kozlov Group, providing testimony and documentation that could help us dismantle a significant portion of their operations." The lead prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Marks, leaned forward with her hands folded on the table. "This is a strong offer from an investigative standpoint. His cooperation could lead to dozens of additional arrests. But there's one condition he's requesting: that you, Kelsey, provide a statement to the court saying you don't believe he intended to cause you personal harm, that you support a path toward family reconciliation, and that you don't believe the maximum charges are warranted." "He wants me to forgive him," I said flatly. "In essence, yes. His legal team believes that demonstrating family support and potential for rehabilitation could influence the judge toward the lower end of the sentencing guidelines. They're positioning this as an opportunity for closure, for healing, for moving forward as a family. Diane's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. Emma looked like she might be sick. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Then we proceed with all 23 counts, and he faces potentially life in prison given his age and the severity of the charges. But you should know trials are unpredictable. Juries are unpredictable. Taking the plea gives us certainty of conviction and his cooperation against a larger criminal network." They left us alone to discuss it, and the weight of the decision pressed down on me like physical force. Before I could even begin to process it, James's assistant brought in an envelope. "This was delivered by your father's attorney an hour ago. He insisted you read it before making any decision." I opened it with shaking hands. The letter inside was written in my father's precise handwriting, 3 pages of careful manipulation disguised as soul-searching confession. "My dearest Kelsey," it began, "I'm writing this from a place of deep reflection and I hope growing understanding. These past days in custody have given me time to think about the choices I've made, the pain I've caused, and the man I've become. I'm not proud of that man. I'm working with a therapist here, finally confronting the demons from my own childhood, the abuse I suffered, the lessons I learned about power and control that I should have unlearned long ago, but never did." The letter went on to describe a childhood of poverty and violence that may or may not have been true, positioning himself as a victim who'd become a perpetrator, someone damaged who needed healing rather than punishment. It was masterfully written, designed to trigger every rescue instinct he'd carefully cultivated in me over 32 years. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," the letter concluded. "I know I've failed you as a father in ways that may be unforgivable. But I'm still your father, Kelsey. That bond, however damaged, still exists. You're the only one who can help me become better, who can give me a chance at redemption. Please don't destroy what little opportunity I have to make amends. Please help me find a path toward becoming the father you deserved all along." I read it twice, feeling the familiar pull of guilt and obligation trying to reassert itself. Then I looked at my mother, at the evidence of years of systematic abuse we'd reviewed the day before, and something crystallized inside me. Over the next week, I consulted with everyone I trusted. Diane helped me understand the psychology of his manipulation. Emma shared her own grief about losing the father she'd thought she had. My therapist, whom I'd started seeing after the hospital collapse, helped me see the pattern clearly. He was still trying to make me responsible for his choices, his consequences, his redemption. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. James had advised me that I didn't have to attend, but I chose to be there. I needed to say my piece, needed him to hear it, needed to finally draw the line I should have drawn years ago. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing footsteps. My father sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive lawyers flanking him like armor. When I entered, his eyes found mine, and I saw him try to arrange his expression into something humble and apologetic. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement for the record, I stood. I spent 32 years trying to earn my father's love by sacrificing my own well-being. I began my voice steady, despite my hammering heart. I worked myself into exhaustion funding his lifestyle. I ignored my own needs to meet his demands. I blamed myself for never being good enough. But I've realized something: he's not capable of love. He's only capable of control. My father's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge waved him silent. He doesn't want forgiveness. He wants continued power over me. He wants me to take responsibility for his redemption the same way he made me take responsibility for everything else in his life. But I won't give him that. I looked directly at him. What you did to my mother, to me, to everyone you've manipulated over decades, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a result of your trauma. It was a choice you made repeatedly, deliberately, because it served your interests. You deserve to face full accountability for all of it. I support the maximum charges on every count. For a moment, the courtroom was completely silent. Then, my father's carefully maintained mask shattered completely. He lunged up from his seat, his face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful after everything I gave you, everything I—" Marshals grabbed him before he could finish, forcing him back into his chair, while his lawyers tried desperately to calm him. But the damage was done. The jury would eventually see this recording. The judge had witnessed it firsthand. The charming, remorseful defendant had revealed himself to be exactly what the prosecution claimed, a man whose control had been threatened and whose true nature emerged when that control was taken away. As they restrained him, I felt something I'd never felt before in my father's presence: freedom. 2 weeks after the arraignment, James received an unexpected call. Caroline's attorney wanted to arrange a meeting between Caroline, me, and Diane. No lawyers present, no recordings, no legal maneuvering. Just 3 women who'd all been caught in the same man's web trying to find some path through the wreckage. James strongly advised against it. She could be trying to manipulate you to build sympathy before her own trial. This could be a trap. But Diane surprised me by agreeing immediately. I need to hear what she has to say. Not for her sake, for mine. We met at a small community center in Bellevue, a neutral space with none of the history that haunted either my father's house or any location tied to our family. Caroline arrived before us, sitting alone at a table in an empty meeting room. When I saw her, I barely recognized her. She'd aged a decade in the 3 weeks since the dinner confrontation. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She wore no makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her expensive clothes had been replaced with jeans and a wrinkled sweater. She looked like someone who'd stopped pretending. "Thank you for coming," she said as we sat down across from her. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for days. "I know I have no right to ask for your time. I know what I've done is—" Her voice broke. "I just need you to hear the truth. All of it. Without the lies I've been telling myself for 30 years. Diane's expression was unreadable, but she nodded once. "Then tell us." Caroline's hands shook as she folded them on the table. "I was 24 when I met Michael. I was married to a man who hit me, who controlled every penny I spent, who made me believe I was worthless. I was trapped, no money of my own, no education that could get me a decent job, no way out that I could see. Then Diane invited us to dinner, and there was her successful husband, so charming and attentive, asking about my life like I mattered." She looked at Diane with something that might have been shame or grief or both. "You had everything I wanted. A husband who seemed kind, a business, you'd built yourself independence. And I hated you for it, even while I loved you, because you were my sister, and you'd always been the strong one, the smart one, the one who made it out of our parents' house and built something real." The affair started as an escape fantasy. Caroline continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Michael made me feel special, powerful, like I was choosing something, instead of just surviving. By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, how cold, how calculating, I was already pregnant with Emma. And I was terrified." Diane's face was rigid, but I saw tears tracking slowly down her cheeks. "He promised to leave you and marry me. But there was always a condition, always one more thing I had to do first. He said we needed to secure finances, that you were holding him back with your moral rigidity, that you'd never let him use the business to its full potential. He said if I helped him, if I just supported him through this transition, we could all be better off. You'd get a fair settlement," he said. "You'd be free to do whatever you wanted." "I believed him because I wanted to," Caroline said, and now she was crying openly. "I destroyed my sister to feel powerful. I helped him gaslight you, helped him isolate you, stood by while he systematically broke you down. And then I spent 17 years being controlled by the exact same man I'd helped hurt you. He used me the same way he used everyone, as a tool, as leverage, as something to discard when it was no longer useful." She looked at Emma, who'd come with us and sat silently beside me. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I let you grow up thinking that man was someone to admire. I'm sorry I helped create a world built on lies that eventually hurt you too. I'm sorry for all of it." Then Caroline turned back to Diane, and her voice became steady with something that looked like resolve. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. but I want to offer full cooperation with the prosecutors. I'll testify about every illegal transaction, every forged document, every threat I witnessed. I'm going to plead guilty to all charges against me and accept whatever sentence they give me. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure he pays for all of it." Diane sat in silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was surprisingly gentle. "You were a victim too, Caroline. Not the same kind of victim, and that doesn't erase what you did to me. But I recognize now that he manipulated you the same way he manipulated everyone. He just used different tools." "That doesn't excuse it," Caroline said quickly. "No," Diane agreed. "It doesn't. But understanding what happened doesn't mean I'm absolving you. It means I'm choosing not to let his poison continue destroying our family. You'll face your consequences. You'll do your time. But after that, if you want to try to rebuild something, not what we had, but something new, I'm willing to consider it." Caroline nodded, unable to speak through her tears. As she stood to leave, Caroline pulled a small flash drive from her pocket and set it on the table. "One more thing. Michael kept trophies recordings he made of things he did, conversations he had, moments when he had power over people. I found them when I was cleaning out the house before it gets seized. I think your daughters deserve to know everything. All of it. Not just what we've told you, but what he thought no one would ever see." She pushed the drive across the table toward Diane. "I'm so sorry. For everything." Then she was gone, leaving the three of us staring at the small piece of plastic that contained God knew what horrors. We sat in James's office staring at the flash drive for a full hour before anyone had the courage to actually insert it into a computer. Diane, Emma, James. Margaret and I, all of us knowing that whatever was on that drive would be worse than anything we'd already seen, but needing to know anyway. James finally took the drive and loaded it onto his laptop, the files appearing one by one as they extracted from their encrypted compression. There were hundreds of them. Audio files, video files, documents all meticulously organized by date spanning from 2003 to 2020. "He documented everything," James said quietly, his face pale. "This is either the most arrogant criminal I've ever encountered, or he was building an insurance policy evidence he could use as leverage if anyone ever came after him." We started with the audio files. The first one was dated April 2007, and within seconds I recognized my mother's voice, younger and stronger than I remembered. "Michael, I need you to explain these transactions. I don't understand why." My father's voice calm and measured. "Diane, you're confused again. We've been over this. You're forgetting our conversations because of your medication. Maybe we need to adjust your dosage." "I'm not confused. I have records right here that show you're becoming agitated. This is exactly what Dr. Voss warned me about. When you get like this, you can't trust your own perceptions. Come here, let me get you something to help you calm down." The recording ended. None of us could speak. We continued through the files. Recordings of my father threatening Diane with chilling specificity. "If you leave me, you'll never see Kelsey again. I'll make sure everyone thinks you're insane. I'll have you institutionalized, and I'll tell Kelsey you abandoned her. She'll grow up hating you." Video footage of meetings with men I didn't recognize discussing moving product through the tech consulting front and cleaning funds in language that made their criminal intent obvious. My father treating illegal activities with the same professional detachment he used for everything else. But the worst was video dated September 2007 showing my parents' bedroom in dim, early morning light. My father stood over my mother while she slept holding a mortar and pestle. He crushed pills methodically, then stirred the powder into a glass of water on the nightstand. The camera captured his face clearly, no emotion, no guilt, just methodical execution of a task. Another recording, this one audio of my father speaking to Caroline. "Diane's almost broken. Another few months of this and she'll sign anything we want. The beauty of it is everyone already thinks she's unstable. No one will question it when she has a complete breakdown. He'd treated the systematic destruction of my mother's mind as a project to manage with timelines and objectives and measurable outcomes. Agent Reeves had joined us by then, and she reviewed everything with the grim efficiency of someone who'd seen terrible things before, but never quite this calculated. When we finished, she asked the question I'd been dreading. This evidence guarantees conviction on all counts, but using it means it becomes part of the public record. The media will have access to these recordings. Your family's story will be national news. How much are you willing to expose? Diane looked at me, her eyes red from crying. This is your choice, Kelsey. You're the one who'll live with the aftermath. Whatever you decide, I'll support. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing something was wrong with me, that I wasn't enough, that I'd somehow failed my family. I thought about my mother living in hiding for 17 years, sacrificing everything to keep me safe. I thought about Emma discovering her entire identity was built on lies. And I thought about all the other families out there trapped in similar situations, not recognizing the patterns because no one talked about them. Make it public, I said. All of it. Not for revenge, but because other families need to know what coercive control actually looks like. Financial abuse, medical abuse, systematic gaslighting. If our story helps even one person recognize the signs earlier, if it saves one person from going through what Mom went through, then it's worth whatever scrutiny we face. The evidence was filed with the court that afternoon. Within 48 hours, the story had broken nationally. Seattle businessman accused of 20-year criminal enterprise built on spousal abuse and fraud ran in the Times. Cable news picked it up. Social media exploded with discussions about coercive control and financial abuse. My phone rang constantly with interview requests. I declined all of them except one. A journalist named Rachel Morrison, who specialized in domestic violence cases and had written extensively about financial abuse. We met at a quiet cafe, and she asked thoughtful questions that focused not on the sensational details, but on the patterns of behavior, the warning signs, the systems that failed my mother. "What do you want people to understand?" she asked. "That we don't need sympathy," I said. "We need people to understand that financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and coercive control are real crimes that destroy lives. We need banks and doctors and lawyers to be trained to recognize the signs. We need family courts that don't automatically assume both parents are equally credible. And we need systems that believe victims before it's too late." The interview ran the following week and generated thousands of responses from people sharing their own stories of financial control and coercive relationships. For the first time, I felt like the pain might actually serve a purpose. Then James called with news that made my blood run cold. "The judge just set the trial date for 3 months from now, but your father's legal team just filed a motion claiming he's mentally incompetent to stand trial. They're arguing he has diminished capacity and can't assist in his own defense." The competency hearing was scheduled within 2 weeks, an emergency motion that could potentially derail the entire case. My father's defense team had assembled an impressive array of experts, all prepared to testify that he suffered from severe mental illness that impaired his ability to understand his actions or assist in his own defense. Their star witness was Dr. Arnold Weinstein, a psychiatrist who'd spent 6 hours evaluating my father in jail. Dr. Weinstein testified that my father exhibited symptoms of complex PTSD stemming from severe childhood abuse, major depressive disorder, and dissociative episodes that suggested he'd compartmentalized his actions to protect himself from overwhelming guilt. According to Dr. Weinstein, my father was a damaged man who'd acted out learned patterns of control without fully understanding the harm he was causing. "The defendant shows genuine remorse and confusion about his behavior," Dr. Weinstein said on the stand. "In my professional opinion, he was suffering from diminished capacity during the period when these alleged crimes occurred." The testimony was compelling, delivered with clinical authority that might have swayed me if I hadn't spent 32 years watching my father manipulate every situation to his advantage. The prosecution's expert was Dr. Patricia Chen, a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in evaluating criminal defendants and who had a reputation for being unshakable under cross-examination. She'd reviewed all the evidence, including the recordings from Caroline's flash drive, and her testimony was devastating. The defendant exhibits classic signs of antisocial personality disorder with strong narcissistic traits, Dr. Chen explained. This is not a man who couldn't understand right from wrong. This is a man who understood perfectly well, but chose to prioritize his own interests regardless of harm to others. The recordings show him planning criminal activities with clear awareness of their illegality. He took steps to avoid detection, maintained false narratives over decades, and adapted his strategies based on feedback, all evidence of intact cognitive function and moral reasoning. She continued, genuine dissociative episodes or diminished capacity would produce inconsistent behavior moments of genuine confusion or regret. What we see instead is sustained calculated action over 25 years. The defendant's behavior wasn't impaired, it was optimized for his personal benefit. Then it was my turn to testify. James had prepared me extensively, but standing in that courtroom looking at my father in his orange jumpsuit, wearing an expression of confused vulnerability, I felt the old pull of doubt. What if he really was sick? What if I was destroying a man who needed help, rather than punishment? Then I remembered the video of him crushing pills into my mother's water. The coldness in his voice when he told Caroline she was useful past tense. The way he'd tried to flee the country with Emma, abandoning everyone else without a second thought. The prosecutor asked me to describe my father's behavior over the years, specifically looking for evidence of whether he understood his actions. My father was always completely different in public than in private. I began. In front of colleagues, neighbors, anyone outside the family, he was charming, generous, the picture of success and stability. But the moment we were alone, that mask would drop. He'd calculate exactly how much pressure to apply to get what he wanted. He knew precisely which words would trigger guilt, which threats would be most effective. I described specific incidents, how he'd time his requests for money to coincide with moments when I was vulnerable or stressed, how he'd kept detailed records of every financial transaction to protect himself legally while forging my signature on documents. How he'd had different manipulation strategies for different people, controlling my mother through drugging and gaslighting, controlling Caroline through the affair, and their child controlling me through manufactured obligation and guilt. My father didn't act out of confusion or mental illness, I said, looking directly at him. He acted with calculated precision. He knew exactly what he was doing, why he was doing it, and how to avoid consequences. He documented his own crimes as insurance. He planned an escape route years in advance. The only thing he didn't anticipate was that eventually someone would fight back effectively enough to stop him. The judge took less than an hour to make her ruling competent to stand trial on all counts. My father's expression when the decision was read showed more rage than confusion, more calculation than illness. The mask had slipped again. But there was one more revelation to come. During the pre-trial discovery process, forensic accountants hired by the prosecution had been tracing every financial thread connected to my father's activities. 3 days after the competency hearing, James called me with news I hadn't expected. "They found an account," he said, barely containing his excitement. "The original Diane K. Morris trust account, the one your mother set up before your father started manipulating everything. It's been sitting untouched since 2008, and it contains $1.8 million. I couldn't speak. The original trust documents, the real ones, not the forged versions your father created, show that it was always meant for you. Your mother set it up as your inheritance, as security for your future. Your father knew about it but couldn't access it without legitimate documentation proving he was the trustee, which would have exposed all his other forgeries. So he just left it alone, probably planning to claim it somehow once the heat died down." James's voice softened. "Kelsey, with proper legal action, we can have that account unfrozen and returned to its rightful beneficiary. You're not just getting justice, you're getting your mother's legacy back." He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The question is, what will you do with it?" The trial began on a cold morning in late March and lasted 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Every day, Emma, Diane, and I sat in the courtroom while prosecutors methodically dismantled my father's carefully constructed life, revealing the criminal enterprise beneath the respectable facade. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Forensic accountants traced every fraudulent transaction, showing the jury exactly how money flowed from legitimate businesses into shell companies and offshore accounts. Document examiners testified about the forged signatures, pointing out subtle inconsistencies that proved my childhood identity had been stolen and weaponized. Medical experts explained how the combination of drugs my father had administered to my mother would have produced the exact symptoms of mental instability he'd claimed she suffered from naturally. And then there were the recordings. The jury watched video of my father crushing pills into my mother's water. They listened to audio of him threatening Diane, discussing criminal activities with associates, coldly calculating how to destroy anyone who opposed him. Several jurors cried during my mother's testimony about the years of abuse and the impossible choice she'd been forced to make. The defense tried everything. They attacked Diane's credibility, suggesting her testimony was motivated by revenge after 17 years of resentment. They claimed I was driven by greed, that I'd manufactured this entire case to access family money. They even tried to suggest that Caroline had acted alone, that my father was merely an unwitting dupe in her schemes. But each strategy crumbled under the weight of documented evidence and my father's own recorded words. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with verdicts guilty on all 23 counts: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, assault, battery, and making terroristic threats. When the forewoman read guilty for the final count, I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't known was holding me captive. 6 weeks later, at sentencing, the judge spoke for 20 minutes about the severity and duration of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the complete lack of genuine remorse shown by the defendant. She sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving at least 85% of the sentence. My father would be 79 years old before he could even be considered for release. Caroline's sentencing came a week later. Because she'd pleaded guilty immediately and provided testimony crucial to convicting my father, she received 5 years with possibility of parole after 3 followed by supervised release. At her sentencing, she spoke without notes, her voice steady but filled with genuine pain. "I spent 20 years making excuses for terrible choices," she said. "I told myself I was a victim, that I had no choice, that I was protecting my daughter. But the truth is, I chose betrayal over courage. I chose comfort over honesty. I betrayed my sister, enabled systematic abuse, and helped steal from my niece. I can't repair that damage, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to be better, starting by telling the truth completely, even when it hurts me." The judge acknowledged her cooperation and apparent remorse in the sentencing. Emma began visiting her regularly at the minimum security facility where she'd serve her time. I sent one letter, brief and honest, acknowledging that she'd taken accountability, but making clear that forgiveness would take time I wasn't sure I had. Before my father was transferred to the federal penitentiary, he requested one final meeting with me. James strongly advised against it. "He'll try to manipulate you one more time. There's no benefit to you in seeing him." But I went anyway, not for him, but for myself. I needed to close this chapter with my own words, my own terms. He sat across from me in the prison visiting room orange jumpsuit, replacing his expensive suits, handcuffs restricting the hands that had once controlled so many lives. He tried his final performance, tears in his eyes, voice breaking as he claimed he loved me, that everything he'd done was to provide for the family, that he'd made mistakes, but deserved the chance to make amends. I listened without speaking until he finished. Then I looked at him with perfect clarity and said, "I hope you live a very long life in prison. I hope you have decades to think about what you destroyed: my mother's freedom, my childhood, Emma's identity, all the lives you damaged for your own benefit. But I won't spend any more of my life thinking about you. You're irrelevant to my future. You always have been. I stood and walked toward the door without looking back. "Kelsey, please," he called after me, his voice cracking with genuine desperation for the first time I'd ever heard. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I walked through that door and closed it behind me on 32 years of manipulation guilt and manufactured obligation. Outside spring sun breaking through Seattle's perpetual clouds, Diane was waiting by James's car. When she saw my face, she smiled and held out her hand. "Ready to start building something new?" she asked. I took her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the love in her eyes, the promise of a future built on truth instead of lies. "I've been ready for 17 years, I said. And together we walked toward whatever came next. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood in front of a modest office building in downtown Seattle, looking up at the sign that read Second Chance Strategies in clean professional letters. The building was the same one where my mother had housed D'Amour Consulting 25 years ago, and when the real estate agent had mentioned the available space, both Diane and I had known immediately it was meant to be. We'd used the recovered trust money to launch the business, a consulting firm specializing in helping women rebuild their lives and businesses after financial abuse, divorce, or family crisis. Diane officially came out of witness protection, reclaiming her real name and identity after 17 years of living as Catherine Walsh. She joined as co-founder and senior advisor, bringing decades of expertise in both business strategy and surviving what we were now helping other women escape. Emma had surprised everyone by enrolling in a business program at the University of Washington. She worked with us part-time, learning the industry, while discovering she had a natural talent for connecting with clients and understanding their fears. Watching her grow into her own strength, separate from the lies she'd been raised with, was one of the unexpected joys of this new chapter. On opening day, as Diane and I stood in our small but professional office space, we both cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of completion of circles closing and new ones beginning. This was what my mother had always wanted to build, not just a business, but a vehicle for empowerment, for helping women achieve the economic independence that made all other freedoms possible. The publicity from the trial brought unexpected ripples we hadn't anticipated. 3 of my father's former business partners contacted us, the men who'd suffered mysterious breakdowns and financial ruin years ago. Inspired by our case, they were pursuing their own legal actions, armed now with evidence that their experiences weren't isolated incidents, but part of a pattern. We connected them with James, who was assembling a class action lawsuit on their behalf. Parker reached out asking if he could volunteer as a medical advisor, helping us screen clients for signs of medical abuse or coerced medication, something most financial consultants would never think to look for, but that he recognized as a common tool of control. Margaret Chen's Women's Center officially partnered with us, creating an integrated network of services that addressed both the emotional and practical needs of women escaping controlling situations. But the most surprising development came from the women themselves. Dozens reached out after seeing my interview, sharing their own stories of family members who controlled their finances, partners who monitored their spending, relatives who forged their signatures or opened accounts in their names. Many told me they hadn't even realized it was abuse until they heard me describe it. They'd internalized the narrative that they were bad with money, irresponsible, incapable of managing their own affairs. I realized then that my story had done more than bring my father to justice. It had given voice to something that happened in shadows, in private, in families where the abuse was financial rather than physical, and therefore somehow seen as less serious, less real, less worthy of intervention. Christmas Eve arrived exactly 1 year after my collapse at work. Instead of spending it funding someone else's celebration while I worked alone, I hosted a small gathering in my new apartment, modest, but mine paid for with money I'd earned honestly doing work that mattered. Diane, Emma, Margaret, Dr. Parker, and James filled my living room with genuine laughter and warmth. We cooked together, shared stories, toasted not to the family we'd lost, but to the family we'd chosen and built. Emma told funny stories about her college classes. Dr. Parker shared updates about other patients he'd been able to help because of what he'd learned from our case. Margaret talked about the uptick in women reaching out to her center, saying they'd finally found the courage to name what was happening to them. This was what family was supposed to be, not people bound by obligation and guilt, but people who chose each other, who showed up for each other, who saw and valued each other as whole human beings rather than tools to be used. My phone buzzed during dinner. A text from the Women's Center. New client needs urgent help escaping financially abusive marriage. Can you meet tomorrow? I smiled and texted back immediately. I'll meet her tomorrow morning. Tell her she's not alone anymore. Because that was the truth we'd discovered through all of this. None of us had to be alone anymore. The isolation my father had weaponized, the shame that kept victims silent, the belief that no one would understand or believe we were dismantling all of it, one conversation at a time, one woman at a time. Some families are born. Some are built. Some are rebuilt from the ashes of what was broken. And sometimes the strongest foundation is the one you construct yourself on truth, on courage, and on the radical belief that you deserve better. I finally had the family I'd always needed. Not the one that demanded everything from me while giving nothing back, but the one that saw me, valued me, and stood with me. That wasn't just justice. That was freedom. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, Diane pulled me aside. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box, her hands trembling slightly. "I saved something for you," she said. "The only thing I was able to take when I entered protection. I've kept it with me every single day for 17 years. I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns. "Baby girl Morris," it read with my birth date and weight. I turned it over, and there, engraved in letters so small I had to squint to read them, were words I'd waited my whole life to see: "My brave girl. Love always, Mom." I looked up at Diane through tears, and she pulled me into her arms the way she had on the day we reunited, the way she probably had when I was born, the way mothers are supposed to hold their daughters, with love that asks for nothing except the chance to keep giving. Some things, it turns out, were never really lost. They were just waiting to be found again. And that's where Kelsey's story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. What started as a collapse on a hospital floor became a journey of uncovering truth, reclaiming power, and discovering that the family we deserve isn't always the one we're born into. Kelsey's father is now serving 25 years in federal prison. Caroline is rebuilding her life one day of accountability at a time. Emma has found her identity beyond the lies she was raised with. And Diane, after 17 years of hiding, is finally living openly as herself, working alongside the daughter she never stopped loving. But more than revenge, more than justice, Kelsey found something she'd been searching for her entire life: freedom. Freedom from guilt that was never hers to carry. Freedom from obligations manufactured by manipulation. Freedom to build a life based on her own values, surrounded by people who genuinely care about her well-being rather than her utility. Second Chance Strategies continues to grow, helping dozens of women each year recognize and escape financial abuse. The ripple effects of Kelsey's courage to speak out have reached further than she ever imagined, giving voice to a form of abuse that thrives in silence and shame. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by family obligation, controlled through finances, or made to believe you're responsible for everyone else's happiness at the expense of your own, please know you're not alone. Kelsey's story is one woman's journey, but it echoes the experiences of countless others who are still finding the courage to break free. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know experienced financial abuse or family manipulation? What part of Kelsey's story hit closest to home? Your perspective matters, and sharing your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear, to recognize their own situation. If you found value in this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next true story. We share real accounts of courage, survival, and transformation stories that remind us that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a path forward. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward freedom. And remember, you are not responsible for other people's choices, mistakes, or emotions. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. And it's never too late to start building the life you deserve. Thank you for listening to Kelsey's story. Until next time, take care of yourself because you matter.